Explained by the Billy Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Death, dying, afterlife, death, life, and reincarnation. Part 1. Death, dying, afterlife, reincarnation. A note: these topics are covered extensively in the German-language books Leben und Tod, Life and Death, and Wiedergeburt, Leben, Sterben, Tod und Trauer, Reincarnation, Life, Death and Mourning. Ascot's acquaintanceship.
Ascot's somewhat peculiar greeting ceremony struck me as strangely familiar and known, yet with the best of will, I was unable to find out why she seemed so familiar and known to me. With a later question regarding this, Ascot only smiled and explained that I should consider my other personalities in earlier lives before this current one. Ascot's explanations, Part 1.
3rd February 1953, Erie. Therefore, before your Billy's birth, you were already placed under the controlled supervision of a certain life form who had to protect, guide, lead, and instruct you. This happened in the same way as with all earlier truth-bringers. Some who were reincarnations of your spirit form, however, were always other personalities who were already selected before their birth and, after incarnating again, were prepared for their mission. This describes a law of creation, which also cannot be defied. Ascot's explanations. Part 6. Emmanuel. Many festivities are carried out in honor of deceased persons who have some sort of significance. Truly, this is nothing more than a cult surrounding personalities in order to honor them or thereby to promote wealth for a few. Honor should befit the honorable, whereby a memory of them remains preserved. But neither a cult or a business for the acquisition of wealth should ever be made out of that.
Contact Report 003.
A human being is capable of living for several hundred, or even thousands of years when it has attained a certain spiritual and consciousness-based relative state of perfection and a correspondingly high and healthy mode of life. But after this stage of about 40 to 60 million years, the spirit no longer needs a purely material body, and it becomes a half-spirit body. It then lives only half materially for another 60 to 80 million years, and in such high spheres that one can no longer get in contact with it from the purely material human vantage point, unless there is a very high level of consciousness-based and spiritual evolution. After 60 to 80 million years, then, the half-spirit, that is to say half-material form, transforms into the first pure spirit form and enters the level of Arahat Atharsata.
Contact Report 006.
I am interested in the development of the life, its classification, the spirit and its development, and how it is concerning the so-called rebirth. Note, see also Contact Report 0531-254.
Therefore, concerning this, I can also only explain to you what is known to us and what we assume to be given. On the whole, there are actually only 5 very important points that we exactly know of, while 2 further points are of no certainty yet for us either. This is because they already lead us into the secrets of the creation, which is unapproachable for us too. Nevertheless, I don't want to withhold our assumptions from you. The life from the beginning to the end is divided, as said, into 7 main stages or main periods. These in turn are divided into 7 sub-periods, hence resulting in its entirety. The sub-stages or sub-periods can be compared to grades in school, except that these must not be calculated for 1 year, but for 1 human lifetime. This means that a very specific form of development and a very specific goal of development lie in a sub-stage. Once all 7 substages are passed through, which can take hundreds of thousands of years, then a main period is completed. The spiritual life form is completely genderless, because a gender is without exception only characteristic of organic life, which guarantees its reproduction. But organic life, like spiritual life, is subject to the law of rebirth in order to guarantee a development in both forms. Thus, every human life form has to live through 7 distinct main stages or periods, and in each case 7 associated secondary or substages periods. In the case of location-dependent organic life forms, the periodic effects of the seasons are determinative, whereas in the case of spirit-evolutive or spirit-dependent life forms, such as, for example, the human being, the periods are irregular and are often set individually. They therefore do not fall under a very distinct cycle like plants, etc., a rebirth of the spirit-dependent human being after his or her death of the body can therefore already reoccur after fractions of a second, or however only after decades, centuries, millennia, or after hundreds of thousands of years. If a spirit-conditioned life is destroyed prematurely, that is, without it having reached a relative evolutionary goal, then it is to its disadvantage. This is because it cannot fully pass through and complete its sub-period and must repeat, that is to say, complete this period through an intermediate life or during a normal life cycle in order for it to nevertheless achieve the period's goal.
So that means that this life may, under certain circumstances, have to be lived a second time.
In a sense, yes. At least from the moment a life was forcibly destroyed. Accordingly, the life is naturally then also shorter, because it only has to make up for something missed in order to fulfill the period's goal. The whole thing, however, can be made up during a normal life cycle, as the case may be.
So then one could call it that it would be the hell, a punishment, so to speak?
Sure, because hell in truth means a self-inflicted punishment which must be served, always providing that the life is destroyed, that is to say, ended by oneself. In other words, this means that a sin, a self-caused error, must be made good again. If, however, the life is destroyed by the hand of a third party, then, of course, one cannot speak of punishment or atonement, etc.
Aha. So then hell and sin in a religious sense are of pure nonsense?
Viewed that way, yes.
So does this then mean that nobody is met with guilt, if he or she makes errors in life, which he or she can make up for in the form that he or she recognizes the error, or whatever one wants to call it, no longer making it, and takes it in as knowledge, from which then a degree of essence of the wisdom must result?
You are able to astonish me because your interpretation meets the deepest core of the truth. The 7 main stages or main periods each represent one full period, with in turn their 7-fold subdivisions. You would say that this would be 1 semester. Therefore, in your sense, this would be called a semester life, during which 7 different subjects have to be completed. I want to explain this to you schematically. 1. Primary life 1. Primary development of the intellect and the consciousness. 2. Primary intellectual and consciousness-based thinking. 3. Primary intellect-based thinking. 4. Primary use of intellect and consciousness power. 5. Primary intellectual actions. 6. Primary willful thinking and acting. 7. Intellectual conduct of the life. Life forms in these stages are designated by already rationality-endowed beings as mentally ill in consciousness, as idiots, etc., whose consciousness and intellect, however, are in reality simply not yet developed in knowledge-based terms new spirit, who has to first form itself through learning and experience, etc. 2. Rationality-based life. 1. primary development of rationality. 2. Effective realization of the rationality and its use. 3. Primary recognition and acknowledgement of higher influences. 4. Belief in higher influences without having knowledge. 5. Belief in higher powers, deluded belief, fear of evil, veneration of what is good, etc., and so on. Germination time for religions, etc. Present stage of the Amstaucht 6. Primary recognition of the real reality. Stage of average Earth human knowledge-based development. Research, first spiritual cognitions and their use, spiritual healing, telepathy, etc., etc. 7. Primary development of knowledge and essence of wisdom. 3. Intellect-based life. 1. High-level development of the intellect. High technology, second use of spiritual power with first cognitions. Primary procreation of life forms. Present stage of the Bobtown 2. Realization and use of knowledge, truth, and essence of educated Earth human wisdom. Slow reduction of belief assumptions. Scientists, etc. 3. First utilization of knowledge and essence of wisdom. Recognition and utilization of the laws of nature. Creation of hypertechnology. Second procreation of life forms. 5. Natural use of knowledge and essence of wisdom in recognition of spiritual powers. Further reduction of belief assumptions. 6. Life in the knowledge of the essence of wisdom, truth, and the logic. Present stage of Samhaik 7. Primary recognition of the reality as real absolutum. Few borderline and humanities scholars. 4. Real life 1. Clear knowledge about the reality as real absolutum. 2. Recognition of the spiritual knowledge and the spiritual essence of wisdom. 3. Utilization of the spiritual knowledge and the spiritual essence of wisdom. 4. Recognition of the reality of the creation and her laws. Your Billy Meier's Art 5. Life according to the creational laws. Clarification of the present stage, which is spirit and the intellect. Recognition of the real task and already tending toward power of the spirit. Total reduction of all belief. The next one, assumptions. 6. Deliberate and directed utilization of spiritual and consciousness-based powers. 7. Procreation of first viable life forms. 5. Creational life 1. Procreation and direction of life forms. 2. Creation of machine apparatus-based viable life forms. 3. Development of spiritual and consciousness-based power for the control of material and organic life forms. Present stages of Moaitstart 4. Willful control of the life in all its forms and species. Arpliaran, Races Tatan 5. Stage of recognitions. Recollections of past lives, etc. 6. Essence of wisdom, kingship. Ish wish. The second to last highest might knowledge. 7. Recognition of the spiritual peace, the universal love, and the creational harmony. 6. Spiritual life. 1. Acknowledgement and realization of the spiritual peace, the universal love, and the creational harmony. 2. Life in purely spiritual forms. 3. Spiritual creations. 4. Disembodiment of the spirit from organic bodies. 5. First spiritual existence. 6. Final spiritual existence. 7. Transition into the creation. 7. Creation life. 1. Twilight sleep over 7 periods eternities. 2. Awakening and beginning of creating in the creation as creation during 7 periods eternities. 3. Creating of life forms. 4. Creating of new spirit. 1.1. In the relative absolute fulfillment of the creation. 5. Creation of spiritual greatness in the creation. 6. Relative absolute fulfillment of the creation in the creation. 7. Last attaining of highest absolutely full development of the seventh period eternity. The twilight sleep of the creation outlasts 7 periods, eternities, great times, 311,000. 40,000 years amount to 1 period, eternity, great time. By the twilight sleep of the creation, all life and the entire universe cease to exist. Only after her newly awakening does she begin to create everything anew. During her twilight sleep, there is neither space nor time. There is only the nothing, since they lie asleep in the unending womb of the creation and the null time. If there is no creating thought, then there is also no power, no time, and no space. There is only duration in the nameless nothing. But concerning the nameless nothing, don't think too much about it, for it is also a mystery to us, which we cannot solve.
Contact Report 007.
A world of spirits, as you called it, does not exist. There are only the fine fluidal worlds in this regard. These are worlds that are located in other dimensions and harbor bodiless spirit forms. When a spirit leaves a material body, then it cannot simply settle down anywhere. It must inhabit a body again. That is to say, it enters a fine fluidal world, thus a world of spirit forms, of which there are countless ones. There, the spirit lives as its own form for so long, until it returns again into a newly created host body.
Aha! That means that the spirit will, as a human being, not always have the same material body and not the same personality, if I understand it correctly. Because you just said a newly created body.
Right? This means that every spirit form normally has a residence body that is specially tailored to it, in which it lives through its life in material form. Over an entire main period, one can thus observe that the facial features of the host body are not always alike, and that they therefore change very noticeably. This applies until a high spiritual level is reached. Not with very low, but with very high spiritual levels, the faces of all host bodies of the various spirit beings begin to resemble each other. So when a guest body has died, then the spirit leaves it and normally enters a fine fluidal world. There, too, it has to live through certain periods again before it can call upon a host body anew. But if a host body is due to some circumstances destroyed with Gewaltsamkeit and prematurely, before it is brought to life by the spirit on the 21st day, then it can happen that the spirit in question does not as soon as possible look for another host body and inhabits it, but that it remains in the realm of the other world. So it will not then penetrate into bodies that are already occupied. Therefore, this won't have as a consequence that 2 spirits live in a single host body and cause serious confusion. There are thus no possibilities for that. So the normal process is that the spirit re-enters the fine fluidal world and in turn, while learning, spends another period there.
This is roughly in line with my imaginations, although not that precisely. But how about that? Are we able to enter any kind of connection with this overall consciousness block belonging to the spiritual being in a fine fluidal world?
Sure, but that is not recommendable. The overall consciousness blocks, which enter fine fluidal worlds like the spirit forms themselves, are no further along in their knowledge than they were in their material life. Untruth and lies and very deliberate deception are still characteristic of them as well. Therefore, the materially living ones should not want to get in touch with them, because they could be lied to on a large scale. It would be better for the living ones to increase their knowledge through their own consciousness work than to aim to acquire it in this way, because in many cases they would only be led into the unreal. Of course, there are also overall consciousness blocks that would be able to respond in an honest mentality. However, there are few of them, and they live in higher spheres because they are further developed consciousness-wise. On the whole, however, there are few human beings who can enter into connection with the deceased, as you say. Although you have large spiritualistic circles on the earth, these are often nothing more than deception.
Contact Report 010.
The human being is bearer of a spirit that does not die, and that, even in deepest sleep of the human being, never sleeps. That records all thoughts and impulsations, that tells the human being whether his or her thoughts are right or wrong, if he or she has learned to pay attention to it.
Contact Report 011.
Immediately strive for the establishment of this group, Vigu, because the time presses. For this group will also be determinant for the fact that people can join you, who committed themselves through previous determinations in previous lives to be active and cooperative in modern times in this group, with regard to the spreading of the teaching of the Spirit and the truth, and for your whole mission. But even when death reaches the human being, the seer and recognizer in him, the Spirit, cannot die, for as a fragment of the creation, it is of eternal duration, like also the overall consciousness block. Everything that the human being inherits, everything that he brings with him from the past through billions of existences, everything that he, in this life or in past lives, has enjoyed, known, read, learned, or experienced lies hidden not in his subconscious, but in the memory banks. Therefore, he does not master the technique of concentration, and therefore, he does not command his subconscious and does not make full use of all his knowledge and capability. The longing for all his knowledge and capability coming from past lives, for the experiences and for the wisdom thus, does not lie hidden deeply within him. He must only recognize and accept the truth, thus acknowledge it and utilize it himself. But for this, it is necessary for him to fight against his own stupidity and to acknowledge that the material intellect does not constitute a human being if it does not also work together in the same measures with the spiritual intellect. When this happens, and when the human being recognizes his spirit, the whole abundance gathered in previous lives will arise again in knowledge and wisdom, capability, freedom, love, and peace, and will richly benefit him once he learns to get all these values from the memory banks and to utilize them himself.
Contact Report 024.
After the application of the religion, the path of evolution must be followed, which, however, has two meanings. The Earthman knows only one meaning, namely that evolution means a development and unfolding in the sense that something already existing, which is, however, still in the hidden, must be developed and unfolded, which therefore means that something must ascend from the unconscious or subconscious to the conscious. The second meaning of the term evolution was lost to man long ago, however, namely that something that does not yet exist must be researched, developed, and unfolded. And since this meaning of evolution has been lost to man on Earth, he also lives in the misconception that all evolutionary things already exist in man and only have to be unfolded and developed or released. The consciousness dwelling in the human being, however, has only stored in itself all those things and facts which it learns and collects in the course of its existence in the material body and life. In countless other lives, man must continue to research, seek, and find. He must therefore accumulate further knowledge, insights, and experiences, which are then anchored in him and in the storage banks as ability. Since besides the spirit, after the material death of the body, also the overall consciousness block dwells in the death life, and there it processes and anchors in itself the results achieved in life. This results in the factor called by you subconsciousness. Became human form again. Through a rebirth, the new consciousness, connected with the knowledge and ability of the storage banks via the subconscious, anchors itself in the human being, who slowly evolves through the material consciousness and through new learning and a gathering of knowledge and transforms everything into a conscious-based ability.
Contact Report 025.
A deceased life form, in the form of the overall consciousness block, possesses in the sphere beyond only the knowledge that it has collected in the material world. If it could then be called from the material world, then it would only be able to discuss and tell what it has just learned in the material world.
Contact Report 031.
When I look at your ship, then, yes, indeed. But this flying metal coffin.
Do not worry about it, as you still are not able to solve the tension within your own thoughts, which trace far back to a past life.
You, Billy Meier, gained the fundamental cognitions. However, through the use of the storage bank's impulses from previous lives, as well as from the trips into the past, which liberated you thoroughly and for all time from any existing heresies. The averagely developed Earth human being already has an age of over 2.8 million years. It took him or her this time to develop from absolute ignorance through many incarnations to the present spiritual and consciousness level. This also makes it clear that if an Earth human being speaks of a master, etc., of 10 or 20 million years of age having communicated with him or her, that this is quite simply untruth, to say the least. According to the laws of the creation, and according to the reality of all time planes, such a master, guru, or perfect one must have an age of 40 to 60 million years in order to be able to get rid of the material body at all. This, however, does not mean that this being has already reached relative perfection, because until then, 60 to 80 billion, 60,000 and 1,000 to 80,000 and 1,000 years are necessary until the pure spiritual incarnation into the plane of Arahat Athersata, because also in the semi-spiritual and pure spiritual realms the creative laws are the same, since becoming and passing determine the course of evolution. Spiritual incarnation, however, is subject to other forms and laws than is the case with material life forms. So a life form of 10 or 20 or 100 or 300 million years of age can never correspond to the pure spiritual form of a being that is even relatively close to perfection. These levels are reached only after the incarnational course of evolution of many billions of years, which, however, without exceptions, are not less than 57,057,000 years. According to earthly terms, and taking the existence of earthly man as an example, 1 or 2 million years of age with the corresponding incarnations correspond approximately to the state of a 9-month-old child after its birth. As a comparison, Earth humans live an average of 70 years, then pass away as material life forms in order to incarnate again as material life forms at a later time. Each life lived means for him or her the passing through a certain stage of evolution until he has reached a certain level of spirit. Compared to the times of the creation, this level of spirit can be called the Great Time. The course of evolution of the material life form can be calculated in 7x7, as in the case of the creation itself. To reach a higher level of spirit, the life form must pass through 7 stages of evolution. 7 levels are in the value of the whole, so 7 different levels of spirit must be worked out. When this is done, then a relative perfection is reached, after which the relatively spiritualized form enters into creation. Each spiritual level, however, is divided into 7 sub-levels, as I have already explained. Explained a little more simply, this is called a material life form has to live through 7 sub-levels of evolution in order to reach the next higher level. Such levels are in turn their 7, which are each divided into 7 evolutionary sub-levels, which thus gives the values 7 times 7 as a prerequisite. Bazop, 7 main levels, 7 sub-levels, 7x 49 further sub-levels, which are again multiplied 7-fold. Note, Billy. The years of material and then of spiritual life forms are to be reckoned in their evolution in many millions and billions of years up to relative perfection, while the time of the creation itself is of course many times greater. If the life forms ultimately enter into the creation itself as perfection, then it evolves further into relative perfection within itself, and after passing through the 7x7 great times, becomes the primordial creation, and begets a new creation out of this form.
Contact Report 036.
He, Hans Jacob, knows very well that this life form, Straubinger, has fallen into a Christian fanaticism, which will make them very strongly dependent on the cult religion in their next life as a new personality by means of memory bank impulses which it will recall. This fanaticism is so pronounced that, according to our probability calculations, it will neutralize itself only after its 4th revival as new personalities in the memory banks.
The subconscious knows very well that death is not a terror, and that everything is only a transition to another life.
Contact Report 042.
What happens to you with the deceased, that is to say, with the lifeless bodies? Do you somehow shrink them into coffins and transport them to the next sun? Or do you bury them as you would us, because they are simply buried 1 meter 80 deep into the earth, in cemeteries? Or do you somehow cremate them, or do you just totally eliminate them?
Earth burial is just as familiar and customary to us as it is on the earth. For this purpose, we have special storage facilities away from the inhabited areas. From ancient times, we have also maintained cremation for very, very rare cases, however, when such a cremation is desired. Apart from burial in the ground, however, the total elimination of the dead bodies is not usual. Burials are nevertheless things of individual requests, so one or the other form of burial can be used.
But what is it like now? Should one rather let oneself be roasted, or better prefer the earth burial, or maybe even a total elimination?
But to your question, it has to be said that the burial of the deceased is the natural form, because it has been like this since the beginning. But everything speaks against a total elimination, etc., because the loss of certain fluidal powers which will persist for some time in the lifeless body, etc., must not be ignored, which of course become volatile through combustion or total elimination.
How long will these powers remain in the dead body?
They can last for centuries or even millennia, but at the longest until the skeleton is destroyed.
And are these powers important?
They can be for the environment, for those who remain behind or the offspring, but also as a reconnection factor for the new personality after the rebirth of the overall consciousness block and the spirit form.
So you are suggesting a burial should be preferred after all?
Certainly, I already explained that by the fact that this funeral is the normal form. The Earth humans seem to be unaware of the facts about the destructive powers of fire. On the other hand, however, the type of burial is really to be carried out according to desire, because every form of life should be able to decide for itself.
Contact Report 048.
I have committed myself to the task, which is why I have to do it. Time is pressing and I have to do everything before time runs out. My work is much more important to humanity than a few years of life. Of course, I can still miss some very important things, and some things do not come into existence and are not dealt with. But I am of the opinion that I can still catch up in a next life as another personality. My spirit form still has a few million years to go.
Of course, but you must not think like that.
But now I have a question concerning contact with the afterlife. Should the human deal with it or not?
Your question is very illogical. You know that the Earth human should not under any circumstances deal with this nonsense, even if certain preconditions could ever require such illogical actions.
Contact Report 051.
Perhaps I have known you long enough. Often it seems to me that it has been many thousands of years.
Which you are not so wrong about.
Contact Report 053.
You have knowledge of their personalities in their former existence? What were those two?
They, that is to say, their old personalities, did not lead an enjoyable life. And since then, they have only made very little progress in their development with their new personalities. Their stay in otherworldly realms was very short. Consequently, they still carry parts of their former personality within them, because their overall consciousness block incarnated again too early, and they withdrew too much old information from the memory banks.
But if I am not mistaken about your just-made statement, then it actually means that both vegetate in a very low consciousness-based standing without a complete personality change, because otherwise their new personality birth would not have taken place so quickly. Am I right?
Sure it is, and everything is very unpleasant about them. And as I have already mentioned, the two men Bertossi and Michael Arends have not made any significant spiritual or consciousness-based progress with their personalities since then in their last life, and still live today in discouraging forms corresponding to the time and life of that time. Their negative concerns are only minimally better than in their former lives, and they are still lying just like their personalities before them.
Contact Report 055.
A further question is whether Earth humans, if they have developed accordingly, can incarnate on other star systems, that is to say, on their planets.
Your question is illogical. You know very well that this is not the case, because a life form can only incarnate again and again on that planet, where it is also different or isolated.
I know that. The question was not mine, nor was it my next. Do beings from other stars or planets incarnate on the Sun or Earth, and if so, with a certain mission?
Just as on Earth, deceased life forms can only incarnate on those planets or worlds on which they lived until their death. But if several extraterrestrial intelligences incarnate on Earth, which very rarely occurs, then they were brought here or will be brought here during their lifetime, because then they lived until their death, lived and then of course incarnated or incarnate here. It is never the case that beings die on other planets and then incarnate on Earth, because both the spiritual and the physical forms are planet-bound. It would therefore not even be possible, according to the laws of sevenness and cosmic order, for a life form to die on an earthly neighboring planet and incarnate again on Earth if the neighboring planet naturally carried life forms.
Contact Report 057.
Have some of you, Plearen, incarnated on the Earth?
You know that this is impossible because none of us died on the Earth.
Contact Report 061.
It is not good for Earth humans to be oriented about the personality and the concerns of their former lives. If knowledge of these things becomes necessary, then they will experience it through their own memories.
Contact Report 062.
This reassures me very much, because Margaret Rufer made such funny remarks about the Negroid ancestry of Manara.
But look, when Margaret Rufer makes such assertions, it is only due to her long-established racial hatred, which she is only partially able to recognize today. In her innermost, however, it still blazes very strongly. It is a matter that still leads back to her life in another personality about 2,000 years ago, and that she now draws upon from the storage banks.
Contact Report 072.
Furthermore, every individual works for their own evolution, not just in this life, but already for the next rebirths as well. Many of your group, Figu, Dar, will find their next incarnations as new personalities in the center as built by you, which will be steered with our and your own help, as well as by the center built by you, for which we will give you the instructions. Some of the present group will spend an extremely short time in the beyond area before they come to the center and join into the group as other personalities through a rebirth into physical form. The first of the present members will again incarnate as another person into the group between the years 2012 and 2025, others between 2033 and 2036, and the rest between the years 2045 and 2072, always assuming that everything fulfills itself. The reason for this rapid succession is that the work is not allowed to lie fallow and must be continued forward so that the knowledge, despite all coming confusion and maliciousness, slowly spreads over your world, because only as a result will those of the enormously further growing humanity grasp the knowledge and be guided onto the path of true evolution. Surely, despite a desertion of the group and the mission, and despite nasty betrayal among others, the first will be Olga, Amata, Claire, and Elsa, who again will incarnate as female life forms if all is actually fulfilled, which, however, partly is in question. Their names and personalities, however, as you know, will no longer be the same, but such of a special type, which today on Earth would sound strange and which I am not officially allowed to mention. Thus, however, it will also be with all of the others, with Engelbert, who again will appear as a male life form between 2053 and 2066, when at the same also Margaret will incarnate as a male life form, as well as also Herbert, however always assuming that everything fulfills itself, and then as new personalities. Between 2065 and 2072, then Jacobus, Marcel, Calliope, Conrad, Hans, Paula, and Polly appear again, in addition to several further persons, whose names are unknown to you, who, however, in the course of the near future and next few years will still come to meet you. Also, leaving and betraying group members are also in the next life with new personalities, not to be ruled out, and who again will confront the group and the mission if all finds its correction, which, however, is often in question. As you, however, have already explained in earlier times, you wanted your mission to be fulfilled up to the end. Consequently, you, respectively, your spirit form for the next few millennia cannot once again stay away prolonged years in the beyond area, but in rapid form, repeatedly at various locations on Earth, you incarnate, or it incarnates, in order to fulfill tasks with other peoples and races of your world, whereby you certainly, as a new personality, also will appear again in contact with your now existing group, which indeed will further spread itself. The members belonging to your group will recognize you with each appearance, as well as these themselves amongst one another. All of your descendants come again sooner or later to the group, partly already by the year 2067, because some will already soon leave this world in order to undertake certain tasks with rebirths as new personalities after a really short absence. The still looser members belonging to the group, as you call them, will incarnate again on different occasions already by the year 2065, partly in your center, yet the majority outside, such, however, that they first will come to the group, only after they have become independent. Mariella and Helga will again be female life forms and incarnate between 2068 and 2071. Mara changes to a male life form, while Martin, Dolphy, and Renato retain their gender. They all appear again as new personalities first after the year 2110, as in fact also all of the others.
Aha, and where will they see again the light of the world?
Mariella and Helga will under certain circumstances be in the center, while all of the others are to be outside of it, but will eventually come to the group, although some of them will be born thousands of kilometers away.
Thanks for the information. There would then still be Plagia and Guido. What about them?
Are you thinking here about Enki?
Naturally.
Both will be born outside of the center, the girl after the year 2090 and the man after the year 2081, after which he then again finds the final path to the group. Consequently, Guido will not be far from the center and comes to the group, while with Anke the matter is still not clear. However, there are the new personalities to consider.
Why not? I mean Anka.
She herself is still not clear in regard to certain things. However, she also might stay away from the center in the manner that she only occasionally appears there, because she will not leave this world there, because she soon goes another way.
Ah, so that's it. Is it that, in departing from life in the center, it is then necessary for certain things?
Surely, because in order to be able to incarnate in the center, there is needed a certain help of each individual. This is connected to the Sohar Center. See the last entry here. A meditation area at the Simya, say Silver Star Center, which requires that each determined day a certain action and a certain thought process must be carried out by each individual group member, as a result of which, first, the aim-directed incarnation with the destination of the rebirth in the center location or in the nearby surrounds can be successful.
Oh, now I understand. The intended Sohar Center is then probably a swinging wave and radiation center with some energies and crystals, etc., yes?
Surely it is so.
Then I know about it. Something similar I know already from a Himalayan monastery, where certain gurus, true masters, determine their birthplace as new personalities. It is an incarnation's...
Stop, for you know that you are officially not allowed to mention this.
Contact Report 073.
If you are clear about everything to come and all of you want to make provisions, not only for this life, but also for the next, then you will know how to raise the necessary capital and will be able to do so. Some of you are already knowing enough that you will be able to participate decisively in this so that you can certainly acquire and build the Center Simyase Silver Star Center.
Are you so sure?
Yes, even if some people still have some doubts. Each one must become clear and know that for the first time since their origin, they have 100% certainty in the determination of their incarnation and place of birth, and can therefore already now provide for their later life as a new personality. But this exception is only because the Great Mission is connected with it. Because normally the course of evolution for the determination of the next place of birth would still take many thousands of years. Those who therefore now strive for it under our guidance gain an unheard of advantage and the possibility of a faster evolution, which advances them after the next life by about 124 years in the consciousness and spirit evolution, whereby they become an elite, which slowly evolves in later times as spiritual leadership for the earth, after which the spiritual leadership of the earth can then be carried out by them.
All sorts of things.
Sure, but everyone determines their own future. And so they have also determined for themselves that they were chosen for their future on the basis of their merits, and that also applies to those members who will fall away again.
Contact Report 074.
So do not worry about the fact that you cannot contribute large financial means to the purchase of the property, because you have already given many times more than anyone else can ever give. Sure, you have received a lot of help in the last months from all our common friends, from Jacobus, Olga, Margaret, Amata, Guido, Elsa, and Engelbert, but also from Hans and some others, for which we are very grateful to them, because through their untiring help alone, everything was able to maintain and develop to the present state. Had they not done so, everything would have gone much more laboriously and taken years, but this would have destroyed already established plans, especially those of the incarnation processes.
And if the purchase still does not come about?
A failure would also mean that the already predetermined incarnations would have to fail in the absence of the center, and that an irreparable confusion would then arise among the initiates. You must not be discouraged by anything, for the property is vital for each individual, in the present time as well as in all later times, when the revival of the new personalities begins.
Contact Report 076 Manara. Furthermore, all those who cannot be responsible for their duty have to bear the damage themselves, because they do not only offend the present, but also the future, and at least the next life with the new personality. Manara, even in some there is still too much thought and the will to be more than others. This partly because they erroneously assume that they are higher in knowledge than others, which in truth is wrong and corresponds to self-deception. But also because they believe themselves imaginatively, or by the lying false statements of mediums to have been allegedly great, or otherwise important personalities in earlier lives. But as you yourself know very well, there is currently no person in your group area who would have been even remotely an important personality in their former lives, because for certain reasons they left all their activities unfinished before they learned them.
I know some things, but not everything. What I have found out so far, however, only confirms your statement. In fact, as I at least know so far, no one of the group has worked for a long time in previous lives, because they were prevented from doing so for a very specific reason. We would say that the profession had been abandoned before 1/3 of it was in. And nobody really got any further than that, apart from housewives and pottery.
Contact Report 079.
In every single one of you Figu group members, except in the dishonest and traitorous, who are still in the group doing their mischief, the longing for certainty flares indelibly, especially for the certainty of your being and continuing far beyond your earthly passing away, which you call death. Yes, this certainty can truly become apparent to each individual if each individual defeats the ego. For in truth, it is only the mist of the ego that prevents the prospect of the realm of true life, of the spiritual, beyond the transformation of becoming and passing away. This is because the ego, the I, attaches too much importance to its own well-being, because in most people it develops further to egoism. Thus, doubts and uncertainties hang over the individual, as well as over the entire humankind of the earth, like heavy thunderclouds from which thunder and lightning, break unpredictably for the earth human called into existence by egoism and materialism and all other unworthy things to which he or she has become subject and by which he or she is imprisoned. To fight this shall be one of your first recommendations, for only when, through the knowledge of the truth, the Son of the Love, embodying the manifestation of the Spirit of the Life, rises up on the horizon of one's psyche, thereby driving away the storm clouds, will one be able to perceive how close they really are to certainty and how unfounded their fear and anxiety was. Unfortunately, for many human beings, only the death of their physical body means the beginning of their actual life, and thus the gradual resurgence of their inner Sohar. In the book Talmud Emmanuel, Sohar, a.k. Zohar, is defined as the radiant splendor of spiritual creational energy when, however, the next incarnation takes place. The same can apply again in the new life through a further ignorance if an improvement in life was not laboriously struggled for and worked for by the preceding personality. Only through a truly inner rebirth will the darkness of absolute or semi-lightlessness within an earthly existence be ended. When the light of the inner being becomes visible to you and the action of the consciousness of life no longer appears to you only as a dull fate, which you yourselves in truth create in deformity. But when at last the Sohar shines in you, then you recognize the invisible, the might of the spirit and of the consciousness, as well as their unlimited power as the true workings, while the visible workings already disappear again as a shadow, but remain as a permanent and invigorating memory in order to continue to work and to be evolutionarily serviceable. It is still the case with many of you that behind all love and wanting to be loving lurks naked fear. Fear of the end of love, fear of the passing away of a loved one, fear of being separated and reunited, and above all, fear of changing to the beyond from this world. These fears are joined by that of pain, originating from ignorance and erroneous teachings, that all life always falls victim to death and evermore lives on in another life, in which it is destroyed and must be destroyed in order to exist. A terrible thought, truly, but it is only of earthly human nature, arising from the incomprehension of the truthly truth, for all life lives out of the other life, that is true so far, but life does not murder other life in order to be able to exist and live itself. One is coordinated with the other, and one helps the other to live in order to be again positioned in the passing away at its given time when it has fulfilled its time and its task. Life is not a progressive sacrifice and becoming sacrificed, as the earth human mistakenly accepts it and is bolstered in it through corresponding erroneous teachings. Rather, it is in truth only a becoming and passing away in the sense of the constantly advancing evolution, and purely in the sense of the creational rules, recommendations, and laws to which creation itself is in every respect classified. So it is only a matter of many great times of rebirth and renewal in the wheel of passing away and becoming. Thus the passing away, the death, reaches into the heart of life, but likewise the life, the becoming, reaches deep down into the heart of death, whereby two realms complete each other, which take over each other simultaneously and gradually bring each other to cognition. Life does not strive for the overcoming of a single passing away death, but for the overcoming of the passing away and becoming in general via evolution. It works towards the upward development of everything that has become, towards that which is imperishable in the innermost of innumerable myriads of life forms, and works towards the ultimate goal of all creations, towards the creation, towards universal consciousness. The actual meaning of life in the material realm is simply that, self-defeat of the always wanting to dominate ego, and the following evolution in the totality of the consciousness and of the spirit. To defeat oneself therefore means that you should help your highest self to victory in order to recognize an even higher self, namely the creation's self, into which you will awaken through even higher evolution. Sure, it is one of the most difficult tasks of your life, but it is also the most beautiful, the most valuable, and the most productive. For behind this task awaits for you the supreme certainty of your all-great life being beyond all external and physical forms of existence. Since your spirit of life in you is a part of the spiritual energy of creation, it is necessary to reflect on this creational root of your being in order to unite yourselves through true internalization with the all-great time within yourselves. For to be one with the spirit of life in yourselves, with the part of creation in yourselves, means to become absolutely free, so also free from the fear of passing away, of death. To be one with the part of creation's energy in yourself also means to recognize your other ego behind your outer ego, namely the creational self. It is certainly the greatest, for the still inwardly unprepared ones, but truly the most terrifying thing that can happen to a human being, namely to truly see and recognize himself or herself, his or her innate ego, which reaches beyond all spheres and boundaries and floats beyond all senses into the all-great time and humanly incomprehensible realms of the creation. But the one who unites himself or herself with the part piece of creation within himself or herself, with the spirit, solves at the same time the riddle of the passing away, of death, which is so frightening for the human being and yet truthfully harmless. If he or she recognizes death as only the other side of life, which means nothing else than sleep in the physical realm, which replaces the wakefulness of the day. Only human irrationality, ignorance, and blindness believe that sleep is the darker side of life, which is why it is the same in reference to death. Of course, many other factors are reflected in the fear of death, but it would be absurd to mention them all. All that remains to be explained to you is what the life-abandoned human body is only imperfectly able to unravel. The part of creation in you is able to reveal with all clarity and truth, namely the certainty of your absolute duration in the all-great timeliness. You should look unswervingly to the tasks of your life on the earth, in the knowledge that on this side the realms of coarse matter rule, and in the other world the realms of fine matter rule. But that the divided realms of this side and the other world, are a single realm, present in the same place, but dimensioned differently, and therefore not in the same period. Of course, it seems that the total sum of misery and suffering on planet Earth is much greater than that of joy and happiness. But this is only a fallacy on your part, which your erroneous teachings, handed down and implanted by yourselves, are of the confused and dangerous view that this is, in fact, so. Not at all, however, for need and suffering, as well as joy and happiness, are always in balance in their measures. Through your wrong thinking alone you overestimate, register, and keep in constant remembrance need and suffering, while in joy and happiness you all too quickly forget the events, and you lose the memory of them. For you have not yet learned to move in balance in these matters and to register negative as well as positive things in equal measure and to preserve them as memories. Nevertheless, you are able to see and recognize the human being's destiny if you are able to change conditions and establish an island of sohar and security from out of the shores of darkness. You need not disturb and worry about the duration of time, for millions and billions of years may still fall into the past before the realization of the highest goal. Many millions and billions of years are still devoted to you and are given to you to smooth out again the creation-related face of your creational homeworld, which has been rutted by you. But you must now be devoted to the change presented to you to grasp the goal of the evolution, to truly grasp, evaluate, and establish the goal of the helpful hand and the knowledge material presented to you.
Contact Report 086. A note. It is recommended to read the full, albeit redacted, contact report to have a better understanding of the following statements. This conversation may be concerning the Soha Center. See the last entry here. A meditation area at the Simyase Silver Star Center.
You know very well that an absolute thought block, that is to say, a full thought blockade, must prevail in the supervisor in the actual. Otherwise, the fluidal powers unite and the aura swinging waves, which then settle in these mixed forms in the crystal centers, which would be dangerous for the new incarnation, because the mixed fluidal forms would affect the two total consciousness block forms, after which both would then try to penetrate into the same body during the process of a renewed life, reincarnation of spurt. So this monitoring task can only be performed during the first time by one person who is able to neutralize himself in every way, you.
Contact Report 088.
But from this, it results with great probability that Adolf, Konrad, Hans, Herbert, and all the others of the same kind will finally leave the group area in not too distant time, whereby then, unfortunately, some acts of revenge by certain renegades against you, us, and the mission are to be expected.
Then a question. Do I have any relations with them from earlier times?
If you think of the latest previous lives, then no.
That is what I wanted to know, because I have not been able to clarify anything about this myself yet, because time just did not allow me to. But what about Guido? I could not find anything for my personalities of the last lifetimes, at least not in connection with our task. The same applies to Herbert, Adolf, Margrethe, Olga, Renato, Konrad, Hans, and all others.
Neither Herbert nor Guido had any last-time relationships or connections in their area of responsibility. Other and very early connections existed, however, very well in the reference to all, and from those the connections of the present time resulted.
Contact Report 097.
If these Sonairan Aitsoi people in the Dal universe can already renew brains, is there not the possibility that human beings can live much longer and reach higher stages of evolution? I know very well that it is possible, through such brain interventions and manipulations, whose forms, etc., are incomprehensible and unknown to me, to prolong the life of a human being by centuries or millennia, but only up to the point where the body becomes barren of any regeneration. Such manipulation, however, cannot lead to the life of the life form in question becoming endless, or even only relatively endless, because the spirit leaving the body must inevitably take place sooner or later, if an evolutionary process is to take place. This is because everything collected in life must also be transformed into knowledge and wisdom, in a spiritual form, that is to say in the realms beyond. If this change process would suddenly fall flat, then the material consciousness would one day become stupid, and the spirit form would stagnate. It must therefore be the case that every form of life has a certain and corresponding lifespan, only depending on the state of its knowledge and the possibility of evolution.
Contact Report 099.
For the Sohar Center and your efforts for it and the evolution of the individuals who are left behind, we will continue to strive, because for those who truly strive, there should be no discrimination in this respect. Their help will also be needed for later incarnations. Wrong actions and wrong thinking lead to the destruction of the whole task, but also to the destruction of the group, which is why each of the fallible members of the group should finally make a thoughtful and corrective effort to integrate themselves into the right values and act accordingly, and also think in the same manner. Otherwise, they put their own evolution into question and again fall into stagnation, which would bring bad consequences for their later personalities in later incarnations.
Contact Report 101.
I have a question to which I only want one answer in the report, but that I do not want my question to be mentioned.
They are based on incarnation transmissions, because what was already created in the human being in previous lives and was of permanence, as you know, is held for all time in the storage banks and is impulsively reawakened, that is to say, withdrawn by the new personality from the storage banks again in the next life. For example, a once profoundly existing, fine fluidal-based love is not simply totally eliminated by death, but is transferred to the spiritual realm, which returns it impulsively to the material realm at the next incarnation via the spiritual consciousness, subconsciousness, and the Gemüt, fine fluidal spiritual counterpart to the half-material psyche, when the corresponding factors meet again, whereby it comes to bloom anew and expands more and more, up to the culmination point, where it unifies itself in universal form and unites itself with all that lives in gross material and creational energetic form.
Contact Report 102.
But now you should give me some more information about the center.
Our analyses have shown that in all the group members, in spite of the bruises and the opposition of those who can still be described as renegades, the necessary quantum of fluidal powers, which serve as incarnation magnetism, was stored.
Well, then another question. Slowly I find myself dumb because the longer I go on, the more unclear it becomes to me as to what the terms incarnation and reincarnation mean. As I have been taught, these terms mean one and the same thing, namely incarnation or simply rebirth, whereby incarnation simply means incarnation and reincarnation means rebirth or birth, which translates both into an understandable language. But now especially the parapsychologists come and set the incarnation for the past and also for Emmanuel's incarnation as divinity, while they only set the term reincarnation as rebirth.
These terms come from the ancient Greek language, and this rather naive distinction has already struck us, which is why I talked to Ptah about it, who learned the ancient Greek language in Greece when it was the only colloquial language there. His explanation was that both terms were used in the same form and for the same purpose, and that there was no difference, because the term incarnation only functioned as an abbreviation of the term reincarnation. Therefore, if you simply use the term incarnation, then you are not making a speech mistake or a naming mistake, because incarnation in this sense is only the abbreviation of reincarnation.
Contact Report 103. A note. Please see the full contact report for the context of this entry.
If he, Jacobus Bertschinger, therefore, does not bring about a change in his diet in the foreseeable future, then his condition will worsen, after which he will soon no longer be master of his senses and will act unreasonably in the form of leaving your group, which already strongly moderates in him and thereby consciously and maliciously destroys his own predetermined path, which would have very bad consequences for him for the next personalities of the next incarnations.
Contact Report 104. A note. Please see the full contact report for the context of this entry.
But on the other hand, those fallible ones determine this for themselves, who do not strive for everything in an honest manner but only make demands, are treacherous and believe themselves to be privileged, which this is why they exclude themselves from our entire community and thus destroy their entire future for very many incarnations to come.
Contact Report 109.
The new regulations in reference to the internal group are, in accordance with the advice of the High Council, the following. The composition of the internal group was planned and formed in its early stages by the members who were meritorious in their other personalities of previous lives and who had made themselves determinant in the circle of truth announcers at very early times, which dates back to several thousands of years. 7. The task of the coming time of later incarnations of the individual group members is rooted in the fact that they, through the present preparatory achieving of a higher evolution, become capable of instructively informing Earth humanity in the teaching of the Spirit and in the utilization of the powers of consciousness.
Contact Report 112.
How is it with you? Do you actually dance, too? I mean, like with us, men and women together, etc.
Such rhythmic movements are well known to us, and the Earth humans have also taken this over from our ancestors. These rhythmic movements are, to my knowledge, known among all human forms in the universe, only in very different forms. But the rule is that male life forms among us do not indulge in such rhythmic movements together with female life forms, but only alone or among their peers. In contrast to the animal world, the sense for rhythmic movements among human life forms is pronounced with the female life form, while the male life form often appropriates this out of pure egoism and out of expediency, even though his movements of this kind are often very unaesthetic and almost foreign to nature. But the other reason also lies in the fact that many male life forms, due to the reversals of the incarnation cycles, are no longer fully pronounced in their masculinity and carry certain female traits in themselves, which then also express themselves in these rhythmic movements and come to appearance.
That sounds just as if such men are not full-fledged men, because due to the incarnation cycle disturbances, they are not fully pronounced as male life forms. Evidently in this case because of a too premature birth of the new personality.
That is, in a certain framework of correctness, and on the other hand, the incompleteness of a male life form does indeed appear if he calculatingly gives himself over to rhythmic movements, so to dancing, as you said. Your explanation in the form of questioning corresponds to the exact correctness and ascertainment of the facts.
Contact Report 114.
But now, can you still give me a few more tips about our core group members? I would like to know to what extent these stood in connection in the incarnations between today and the last 2,000 years.
There are, in fact, various and very interesting connections there, which I have not yet fully worked out, however. Therefore, I would only like to give you one tip relating to this, that all their physical bodies repeatedly changed in the interim from that time to the present time, so they eked out their lives alternately as male and female life forms, and, of course, also always as other personalities. An interesting case, though, with special data, points out that Maria, your wife, and Madeline were triplet sisters several centuries ago as other personalities, and became a talking point in certain things. But so also did various others of the current group members become a talking point in other times as other personalities, for they actuated themselves organizationally in the matter of the spiritual teaching and even established organizations that have remained existent up to the current time. In particular, I would like to mention in this connection the now very distinct organization of the Great White Brotherhood, which was established and called into life by the former personality of someone who performs very valuable services today as a group member in your group.
Contact Report 115.
An exact determination of time only occurs in each case when a spiritual life form has separated from the material body and has gone into the otherworldly area, in order to work further there as a purely spiritual form and to evolve further. In your highly evolved case, however, the fact is already given that you, in your material life, can make a fairly accurate determination of the year of your next incarnation, but this can still vary a little, so by about 2 to 3 years. This self-determination possibility of the rebirth time of the spirit form still in the material, so in the physical life, can only take place, however, if a life form has already reached a certain spiritual evolution potential, as this is the case with you. However, since you are presently able, in your current physical state, to bring about such a predetermination that is accurate to within 2 to 3 years, then this can still change up to the end of your life in such a manner, through your further evolution, that the data will be very accurate. Even though you already moved over from the Lyra region to the Earth at a very early time, I have always disregarded this and have always seen you as an Earth human. But from now on, I will try to see you again for that which you truly are. I am sorry, but due to your rigorous effort to present yourself as a genuine Earth human, you have also directed my thoughts in this direction. Thus, I saw you as an Earth human.
Somehow I am indeed also such an Earth twit. For the devil knows how long I've already clambered around on this world after I came to this planet. Since then, I have lived so many lives here as the most varied personalities that I am no longer able to count them. I have an earthly physical body with a spirit from the depths of the universe, as I already said once 8,500 years ago, as another personality. This earthly body, however, binds me to this planet and is connected with it, from its dust, so to speak, which is why I also have a feeling in me that I somehow belong here. At the same time, I just ask myself, how will I, with such a body, one day go back to my actual home?
It will no longer be an earthly one, for at the established point in time, parents for you will come to the Earth, who will procreate your new personality on this world, and will give birth to this with your spirit form on your original homeworld, after your spirit form will have taken possession of its descendant in the mother's womb.
Ah, then I am indeed calmed. Does this also happen, then, with all the others, who are still roaming around here on the Earth?
Certainly it will be likewise with them.
That is really comforting to know. But tell me, are there also those in our group who do not come from this planet originally?
Sure, many, but I would not like to mention the names to you now openly.
Contact Report 117.
Can one of you tell me whether Elsie Moser was something in my last life, as Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin see here and here, whether we knew each other?
No, that was not the case. For at that time, 1869 to 1916, she was not incorporated into an incarnation.
And in my life before, as Jacob Ludwig Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy see here and here?
There she was a friend. But at that time, 1809 to 1847, both of you were otherwise married up to the ends of your lives. I would not like to mention more about that for the time being.
Then please still tell me, however, whether Elsie has had 1 or 2 other incarnations since then.
Since then, it has not been only one, that is, not just the current one.
Contact Report 125.
Oh, if you speak of sadness, then you probably mean the sorrow of death, if I understand you correctly and interpret your facial expression correctly. It really hits me, because even if one has already often experienced the same, it still lashes out on the psyche again and again. One really does not like to lose a human being. That always gives me very much to think about. And indeed, even when I see unfamiliar human beings dying, or even only hear of their dying, when they die or are killed, etc.
Contact Report 126.
But now, what is the reality of this? Were the two already together in previous lives as other personalities and perhaps even married to each other?
They first met each other a few centuries ago as other personalities and became quite good friends. But they never had closer relations before, and also not after that, which we have clearly determined in the meantime since our last contact. But truthfully, the two of them, with which I address Bernadette Brand and Engelbert Vector, were never closer together than in a good friendship between two families over approximately 38 years. But more was not to be noted, and since then the two met for the first time again in your group.
Contact Report 129.
These are the actual facts surrounding Vreni and Lilo's husband, Albert, who still carries very many parts of his former life with himself now in this life, because he draws them off from the storage banks.
Contact Report 155.
If human beings know the past of their former lives, then they do not cope with this. It is better not to reveal anything about it.
Contact Report 182. A note: please see the full contact report for the context of this entry.
From our side, we can no longer agree under the present circumstances to be helpful to her, Elsie Moser, through impulses, as we also can no longer do this in the future for other fallible group members. According to the explanation of the High Council, ultimately, it will yet so happen with the fallible ones, such being lawfully determined, that after the deaths of the fallible ones, their following lives will no longer be given to the area of knowledge and to fast-paced evolution. Instead, they will arise in primitive people who are still ignorant of the knowledge of spirit and who still count as primitive people among the human beings of this world. Moreover, it should be possible that the following lives can, in full knowledge, be made fully aware of the present life and of the mistakes of the persons concerned, which were deliberately committed in malice, and this up to 7 consecutive lives, without ever being given the opportunity of being able to leave the place of birth and, in the meantime, being able to arrive in civilized parts of the world. Note: see also sentence 108 below, and the following entry from Contact Report 188. However, the High Council still sees another possibility, namely that the fallible ones reflect upon the truth and love, so that after some following lives, they can be newly integrated into a community that is aware of the process of evolution, like the present one, through which a few truth-thinking ones are led and through which progress is made with them, whereby a certain part of the goal can still be achieved and all necessary values can later follow from that. According to the explanation of the High Council, this law represents a real possibility that someday the fallible ones can yet achieve their evolution.
On the other hand, I think that it is fairly common among certain human beings of the earth that they behave themselves in such a ricocheting manner. And if I keep in mind what has sometimes happened in the past lives of many of these people, and what prospects they had for this present life, before you recently looked after them, then I think that their lousy machinations are rather damn primitive, and that dirty thanks are due for this. Especially when you now speak primarily of Elsie, I think that just she should be of the greatest gratitude for your help and impulses, which have led her to a better life than what she herself has determined in life.
That is of correctness. Nevertheless, practically all of the fallible ones do not know that in their last or in several of their past lives, they lived as different personalities, who did not live according to their destinies to such an extent that their following lives necessarily had to be impaired by the impulses of their memory bank, and this led to degrading lifestyles. But that their present existence has run within a good framework, and that this has only happened through our assistance, because we have broken through their old dispositions from which they had malignantly distanced themselves. Of this they are not aware.
So the whole thing, nevertheless, again leads to the fact that they themselves are responsible for their deeds and actions, even if the past commitments of their former lives are not known to them. And on the other hand, it is that each person always only makes the best out of their present life, without knowing about their lives before. So it does not matter whether they know what was in their previous lives, even though a few things may be of use. A wide variety of human beings fantasize that they had only acted evolutionarily in the past lives and led a good life, even though this often does not correspond to the truth, such as with Mrs. Elsie, who lived in Germany before her present life, and who came to an inglorious end there as another personality.
Elsa's true destiny, also in relation to the mission, is lost in her subconscious, and this has been the case for more than half a millennium. Since then, she has only lived at the edge of these determinations in a form according to notion, whereby she gave preference to worldly pleasures and vices, however, in every one of her past lives as other personalities, which led in her last 8 lives, without exception, to a violent end, which I will mention individually if I make up my mind to reveal these secrets to the group members. In any case, the contents of her last 8 lives always led to the fact that her life and her lifestyle were very negative and got very badly out of control of the good human nature. Thus, we had to use actions in logic and rationality for her present existence, in order to let her shape her life in a form that was positive in certain things. So also her birth occurred in a place and in a family that were not originally determined by her, but which we chose for her. That you also played a certain role with her during childhood, this was also planned by us. But now, to come to speak on her last life, I need to explain this. Her destiny, which was created at that time in connection with the present life, was rather vile, by which she would have sunk into extremely negative depths again. Burdened from her current life, which had been brought forward, she ingratiated herself with a larger number of men and did not exactly remain loyal to her husband. The case of her former life in Rostock as the master carpenter's wife, Mrs. Wendt, is stored under the year 1835 in the archives there. But now, the breach of her promise has persuaded the High Council to give its advice towards the removal of impulse assistance, the discontinuance of the contacts, and the abandonment of the further life monitoring of the fallible ones, who can be reincarnated, up to 7 consecutive lives among the people of the earth, with the full memory of this life and of their committed mistakes and deeds, where they will have no opportunity at all of arriving into knowing civilizations or of making their way up to a higher position in the nation in which they are born. Through this, during several lives, they will become aware of the awfulness of their wrong and malicious acts that were committed in their present life. Thus, the fallible lives will then be of full thoughtfulness, due to their knowledge that their people will be thousands of years ahead of them, without these ignorant ones being able to come under this knowledge so that they may bring it to use. If we explain these actions in logic and rationality, then we do not act against the existing laws, because the laws of creation themselves include such provisions, according to which these natural laws always begin to work whenever a human life form gets very badly out of control of the good human nature and threatens to destroy certain creational goals. If the following lives are then lived according to natural laws, then in each case there is a reintegration into the old form, whereby the normal condition prevails once again, so the memories of the past lives only appear as a notion. If, after such events, a life form again breaks out into becoming very badly out of control of their good human nature, then there is no elimination of the spirit form, as you well know, but a further rectified series of rebirths.
Contact Report 188 note. See also the previous entry from Contact Report 182, sentences 41 and 108.
Furthermore, I have to explain to you that now, in spite of everything, one sanction, editor's note, clarified by Christian Frainer, some ancient extra rules for a defined group of spirit forms, who had in the past voluntarily committed to what is called the Codex, have since the 1990s no longer been in effect and will never be reactivated again. Remains in force, as it was recommended in an advisory wise by the High Council, namely, that during 7 successive incarnations no contacts whatsoever take place with the group community, that consequently these lives are to be lived through among other peoples and circumstances. If an exclusion from the group has to take place, due to malicious violations, or if a group member excludes himself or herself, or allows himself or herself to be excluded due to betrayal and mission-destructive actions, and thus due to a decision of his or her own in this respect.
Contact Report 200.
So, my son, you told me recently that in the coming time, genetic research would be widely discussed, but also a renewed debate would break out regarding the concept of the Incarnation, as this was already the case in earlier centuries. I mean in terms of the Incarnation, and thus, the moment is meant in which the fetus becomes animated in the womb through the spirit form that is capable of rebirth, which includes the entire consciousness block of the new personality that is created by the spirit in the fetus in which the spirit respectively enters.
But the fact is that there is no soul, because in truth, this is identical with the psyche, which could have allowed the fertilized egg to become filled with reason, but that in truth, it exclusively deals with the spirit form which is capable of rebirth, respectively the spirit. Nothing of this was mentioned at all. The animation of the fetus takes place via the spirit form on the 21st day after conception, with which also the heart begins its rhythmic activity, and thus begins the existence of the individual, because at the same moment, when the rebirth, respectively the reincarnation of the spirit form takes place in the fetus, the new personality, along with the entire consciousness block, becomes born into new life. I still have just a brief explanation to deliver, with regard to what was presented, in reference to the Incarnation, respectively the animation of the fetus by the spirit form, as revealed from a future review, the absurd and erroneous claim that from the moment of conception, respectively from conception to human life, the fetus would be a reason-gifted life form, and thus an individual will recently be reaffirmed, maintained, and taught again by an ignorant layman with respect to the rebirth of the spirit form and its animation of the fetus.
Contact Report 213.
Then something else. The creational spirit form of the person is wrongly designated as the soul, but at the same time, the value of the psyche embodies this, according to today's better understanding and sense. Now, the spirit form, respectively what the person designates as the soul, which is capable of wandering according to Christian and other religious faiths, even the so-called soul wandering, is denied, especially by medical science and by many other would-be knowledge directions, as well as its ability to be reincarnated. How long will it be until the incorrigible ones acknowledge the fact, as it is even set forth by the spiritual teaching, aka creation energy teaching, that the spirit form actually exists and is arranged into reincarnations?
With great certainty, the 20th century will bring no scientific insight relating to this. However, it will look different after the turn of the millennium, as a look into the future of a related form has proven.
Contact Report 215. What the Pleeran wish for Earth humans.
The Earth human considers that he or she will live new, lives over and over again in striving for that which is higher in accordance with the creational laws and recommendations through many new personalities in reincarnation of the spirit form and the overall consciousness block, namely, in the obligation of a creational path that he or she consciously develops in every logical, good, and positive form. But this means that every person must strive for his or her advancement through every personal responsibility, and society must also make that possible for them.
Contact Report 228. Question. I assume that the so-called punitive incarnations, to which those core group members were assigned who are destined to be in the core group, are not punitive incarnations at all, because that would not make any sense to me at all according to the spiritual teaching. I see it rather as the case that these, when they realized that as bearers of the mission and task they had become unfaithful to their commitment, sought a way to anchor the mission and the associated task more firmly within themselves.
Yes, you can put it that way. Those faithful to their mission have perceived the decisive impulses from the memory banks, deciphered them correctly, and put them to use, consequently seeking and finding the path of the mission and now walking along it, as they have done since time immemorial. On the one hand, the mission and their use of it serves primarily their own evolution, and on the other hand, it also serves to instruct human beings themselves and to impart to them love, knowledge, and wisdom, as well as inner peace and inner freedom, balance and harmony.
Contact Report 229.
Jeremiah's predictions. They will learn to understand procreation and birth and life, death and dying, and will lose all fear and dread of them, because they will turn to the teaching of the prophet. And the human being will have the time of several lives, because their age will be prolonged, and they will become knowledgeable that the light is never extinguished, and that life continues also in death and in revival, for their knowledge will become comprehensive wisdom.
Contact Report 236.
But something else. Have you already found out that certain Earth humans are simply inconvincible in reference to religious faith concerning everything that is just purely man-made? I am thinking, for example, of rebirth and of what is maintained and erroneously taught in relation to this, that the personality becomes reincarnated. Although, this is not the case because, after the death of the body, the personality is dissolved by the entire consciousness block and becomes pure energy, from which, through the entire consciousness block, an entirely new personality is created, which is no longer identical to the preceding one. Only the spirit form becomes reborn, respectively reincarnated, and thus not the personality. But now, there are the super clever ones who deny this and claim that Jesus Christ, respectively Emmanuel, will be reborn as a personality. But this is utter nonsense, just like the erroneous religious teaching that deceased human beings, within the scope of rebirth, would become reincarnated as animals.
These absurdities are well known to me, but it is extremely difficult and often quite impossible to be able to teach human beings who are infected with such delusional beliefs, because every religious or sectarian faith enslaves everything in the world of apprehension, the world of thought, and the world of feeling of the person, and evokes a certain obsession in such a manner that reason becomes turned off and becomes completely devoid of any purpose, whereby any clear logic is nipped in the bud. Religion, as this is common on the earth among the human beings, is like a vicious drug, which disrupts and kills both the intellect and reason.
Contact Report 238.
But I actually wanted to talk about something else, namely the fact why Menachem Begin will go through all the horrors of all hells during his pre-death process, and then finally succumb to madness. The reason for this is to be found in the fact that during his life, this mass murderer absorbs all the horrors and pains of a physical and psychological nature and stores them in the memory banks, and thus everything that he has consciously or unconsciously inflicted on his victims. This storage takes place in unconscious form and is deposited impulsively in the planetary memory banks. The unconscious storage of these impulses is so strong that a determination of the wrongdoer arises from it, which has a direct effect on him. This means that this criminal and mass murderer makes the psychological and physical horrors of his victims, which he unconsciously absorbs, his own destiny for his death, although this does not extend to the next life of a new personality. This is the form of self-punishment of such fallible ones, if they cannot fully remove that part of the guilt in the fallible life, which leads to the normal process of removal of guilt in the following death life of the total consciousness block through processing, but which does not result in the form of assistance to the former victims in their next lives and new personalities. A process which can be fulfilled in Codex members up to 7,000 reincarnations if everything takes its normal course, but which falls away through the dissolution of the Codex, and is really only made possible by a Codex provision. Even mass murderers of the normal and non-code-bound kind are not able to go the normal course of dying, for through their criminal and life-destroying deeds, or through their other capital crimes, they force themselves to a self-punishment of the kind mentioned. According to the law of creation, this self-punishment is given as a logical possibility, but it can only come into function through the illogical thinking of the human being. Illogical thinking is based on the fact that one wrongly assumes that they can get very badly out of control of the good human nature, with impunity, without being called to account. In his illogical thinking, however, one does not recognize that he or she has a conscience that refers him or her, via the subconscious, to a punishing destiny that affects the dying process. Even if one thinks of a person as having no conscience or only a wicked conscience, then this is not correct, for the conscience does not only work in the form that its work becomes obvious in the life in question, but it also works in the aforementioned form that it sends impulses via the subconscious into the memory banks, and thus creates a destiny for the state before the actual dying process. These kinds of determinations are always and in every case fulfilled and inevitable in all their horrors, fears, and pains. In fact, however, they are a product of the fallible human being himself or herself who, through their conscience, create such determinations which they disregard and do not want. This, however, is the compensating justice through the laws of the creation, which themselves know no punishment and no punitive measures, but only ways by which the human being punishes himself or herself when they misbehave. However, all this has in no wise anything to do with the misunderstood karma through which human beings allegedly then have to atone for their deeds in the previous life, as a new personality in the next life. This assertion is absolutely false and irrelevant, for no creational law knows such a form of karmic punishment or similar nonsense. The self-punishment mentioned is based on completely different things, which I have already explained.
Contact Report 239.
May I now ask you once again for certain things regarding the previous lives and names, etc. of the group members and loved ones?
On the one hand, every person must recognize and process the truth and all things through his or her own reason. And on the other hand, the person becomes dependent on such information and no longer acquires it himself or herself. But if you or we would be given the desired information, especially with regard to certain aspects of previous lives or to practices and guidelines in the present life, then for the persons concerned we would take the self-initiative to fathom everything, to handle everything correctly, and take sole responsibility for everything. However, we may not do this even if one continues to ask for it so often.
Contact Report 246.
My next question relates to the freezing or shock freezing of all kinds of life forms. If, for example, a person is shock frozen for any reason, perhaps to overcome time, etc., then I assume that this person is in a kind of apparent death. This means, however, that the spiritual form does not leave the body, but remains in it until the time when the body is revived. Am I right in my assumption? To my knowledge, you yourself have used such methods in the past, have you not?
That is correct, as is your explanation. If the body of a material form of life would die through shock freezing, etc., or simply be abandoned by the spiritual form, then this spiritual form would not return to the corresponding body again, but would enter the afterlife realm, from where it would then enter an absolutely new body again for the purpose of reincarnation. Once a spirit form has left a body, it never returns to the body it has left, but without exception selects only the new body destined for the next life.
Contact Report 250.
There are also many doctors, etc., who simply sell poisons to the suicidal, often at sinfully expensive prices, with which they can then carry themselves or with the help of others from life to death. In addition, I find that any form of active or inactive, and so as any direct or indirect euthanasia, is murder as well as suicide. Man does not live to kill himself or have himself killed at will. Both, I find, correspond not only to a boundless cowardice, but also to an absolute irresponsibility towards oneself as well as towards life, evolution, and the creative laws and commandments. Man has his life and lives it in order to live life evolutively in all responsibility. The life itself, as well as the honor and responsibility of man, demand a conscious permanence until the natural end of life. And truly it takes strength, intellect, and courage as well as a great responsibility, inestimable, much more than it takes to kill itself, or to be killed. Courage, strength, love, intellect, and responsibility are indeed needed for life, but not for cowardly murder or suicide. Murder or suicide, however, cannot be seen as murder or suicide and cannot be judged if terminally ill people, who are perhaps still plagued by severe pain, insist that they are not connected to life-supporting machines and equipment, etc., or maltreated with purely life-supporting drugs, etc., in order to continue to maintain the extinguishing and naturally dying life as dearly as possible by all conceivable means. To reject such measures, I think, has nothing to do with suicide or murder, because it only guarantees natural dying, which is the absolute right of every human being, on which he can and may insist. However, this really only applies if a person is truly consecrated to death, and everything is not just a pure life-supporting measure that delays the inevitable death by machine, apparatus, medication, etc. Pure painkillers are of course not affected, because they are not only life-supporting, but also pain-relieving.
This irresponsible evil of euthanasia or indirect euthanasia as well as suicide is well known to us, and none of these forms can be approved by us, because they all violate the creative laws and commandments and thus the responsibility of life and evolution. No responsible Earth human can agree with these murders and suicides either. All these forms are despicable and inhumane.
Natural dying is one of the last experiences and the greatest experience in the life of a human being, which is never given by suicide or by letting oneself be killed by sight.
That is a true word.
Contact Report 251.
All extraterrestrials who stayed on Earth and died here never returned to their homeworlds. Their spirit forms slipped into the earthly realm of the afterlife, and since then have reincarnated again and again in new becoming bodies of people who were born on Earth.
Contact Report 261.
The question remained whether beheading with a guillotine really guaranteed that fast and humane death, as the inventor of the killing machine had hoped. It had been observed before that the faces of the beheaded moved for some time. In 1795, for example, the German anatomist Samuel Thomas Semmering heard from colleagues that the lips of a cut-off human head were moving, or that the cut-off heads were grinding with their teeth. From this, the professor concluded that in severed heads the consciousness and thus also the sensation of pain were preserved for a considerable time. Imagine that. As the last clear thought before death, a decapitated human being has the horrible realization that he has been decapitated and is now lying there in two parts. An idea or an event that an upright man probably does not wish for his worst enemy and the worst criminal. But now the question about the killing method of decapitation. To what extent is it true that a decapitated human being does not consciously notice the cutting off of his head, as the doctors claim? You and Quetzal once told me something else.
With regard to the painlessness that is supposed to occur in the head and body during beheading, it has to be said that this is indeed the case, and that the medical clarifications are correct. However, this is only true if the head is completely separated from the trunk within a fraction of a second. What is against all truth, however, is the fact that consciousness disappears within a few seconds with the separation of the head from the trunk, because in fact it continues to exist for several minutes and is therefore active, which under certain circumstances can last up to 20 and more minutes. This, however, cannot be established with the equipment and devices of the most modern kind that have been conventional on Earth until now, because the actual brain activity is switched off within seconds, which does not apply to the consciousness itself, because this still functions for quite a while without the actual and ascertainable brain activity, and consequently the heads fully realize everything by beheading the executed for long and terrible minutes before the consciousness actually goes out. But if the earthly physicians claim otherwise, and thus the opposite, then this does not only correspond to arrogance and ignorance of the facts.
Contact Report 296.
Moreover, it is not the case that a cloned person has the personality of the person from whom the cells are taken for cloning. So it is lies and deception, and even more if it is claimed by the cloning creators that a certain child or another certain human being can be recreated by cloning. In any case, it is a completely different person with an absolutely new personality, and thus with a completely different possibility of development, different thoughts and feelings, different views and interests, as well as with an absolutely different character, and so on. Through cloning, only a form of life arises, in this case, a human being, which looks only externally the same as the human being from whom the cell or cells are taken for cloning. Cloning thus never creates the same person from whom the cell is taken.
Contact Report 300.
Then a somewhat tricky question, which I unfortunately could not answer. Do dying in sleep also lead to dying experiences?
This is possible, but not the absolute rule.
And what is it like before dying, just before the state of agony occurs, so to speak, in the waking state, with full consciousness?
This is not the case because in the waking state no dying or near-death events can occur. Subsequent explanation. With regard to the question of whether or not dying in sleep also results in dying experiences, the answer was that such experiences are only given when a state of agony appears in sleep. Agony means to lie in the death struggle, whereby the struggle is related to freeing oneself from life in order to surrender to death.
Contact Report 301.
Another question. One of you once answered a question about this by saying that active or passive euthanasia would be tantamount to murder one way or the other, in any case, so that the Hippocratic oath and sense would be grossly violated and trampled on.
That is correct. Active or passive euthanasia is and remains murder, because no man has the right to determine the life and death of another man or his own life in such a way that an unnatural death is consciously brought about. But if this is disregarded, then in any case a murder or suicide takes place, which corresponds to a tremendous human assumption by which creative laws are disregarded and raped.
What about when simply life-supporting machines are turned off, when bodily functions are only maintained by such apparatuses?
Even such apparatuses are unnatural, for they not only rob man of the dignity of natural dying, but they also tinker with the craft of natural dying. If there is no hope for improvement of health and the natural preservation of life, then no apparatuses may continue to keep the dying body alive senselessly.
I do not think that can be called active or passive euthanasia and therefore not murder, can it?
That corresponds to the correctness.
Contact Report 303.
For my part, I have something to say about Jacobus Bertschinger and his behavior on the 19th of May. His behavior was incredibly primitive and even primatial and shameful, but he does not seem to comprehend this and to feel comfortable and big at the same time, whereas he does not realize that he is humiliating himself unbelievably deep and only harming himself, as it was the case with his last 7,000 personalities, who came out of his total block of consciousness. He thinks extremely confused, and cannot see from it that he will always be the loser, as was always the case with his former personalities. And if he does not change his thinking and his whole attitude, then nothing will change for the better with him, whereby he will always remain the disadvantaged one.
Contact Report 315.
The human being is an independent individual, his own personality with his own ideas, thoughts, feelings, abilities, and possibilities, as well as his own character and all that makes him a human being. This means, however, that he cannot simply be programmed, but that he has to become very laboriously pregnant with reason and understanding, and just as laboriously learn and change. But all this takes up a great deal of time. Not only days, weeks, months, decades, centuries, and millennia, but millions of years, during which the reincarnations of the spirit form and the total block of consciousness take place. Old personalities pass away, new ones arise and live, whereby unstoppable learning and progress are made. But this is precisely the reason why it is necessary to learn inexorably, that proclaimers and wise men must teach men inexorably throughout all times that no man is without error, and that, by this alone, he must put himself on an equal footing with all other men, and go to the same level, so as not to rise above the others and their fallibility, and to believe that he has progressed better, smarter, more intelligent, and higher than the others.
Contact Report 317.
Tomorrow, the 18th of December, Margaret Rose will bid farewell to life, for her spirit form will evaporate from her old body and enter the afterlife.
Contact Report 324.
But this is understandable to you, Billy, because your earliest personalities of earliest lives existed for a very long time, many millions and even billions of years before ours, and consequently, through our own personalities of all former lives and until today, there was no possibility to store such enormous and immeasurable values in the most diverse planetary, galactic, and universal memory banks from which we could profit today. So we are dependent on your explanations and advice, as well as on the higher concerns of the teaching of the Spirit through your person, because only you are able to give them to us, because only you are able to use all the frequencies of your former personalities in a harmonious way, to rebuild and use all the deposited knowledge, all the love and wisdom, as well as the knowledge, experiences, and abilities, and all the knowledge and understanding, etc., again and again in every new life of every new personality.
You see, this is exactly why people have been attacking me for years, making me out to be the greatest, the brightest, the most clever, the most able, the most knowledgeable, and so on. But when I think of all the things I don't know and cannot do, don't understand and cannot control, I feel like the smallest worm in the universe, even less than the tiniest microbe. For I know that I do not know much, if I may put it that way, with regard to all things that are outside of that which relates to the spiritual and creative, and to the laws and commandments relating to it. I can certainly fall back on a certain life experience, and on experiences as well as on some abilities which have resulted from my present life, but I cannot and do not want to shine with it, even if perhaps some things have been extraordinary, and not commonplace, and are not experienced by human beings en masse, etc. But that is not why I think and feel greater or more important than any other human being is. In fact, I think and feel equal to any other earthling or anyone else in the depths of the universe, and no matter if child, woman, or man. So I am no more and no less than any other human being. Effectively, I am neither a hero nor a superhuman, nor supernatural or omnipotent. Truly, all my life I have tried to be no more and no less than a man of action, to fulfill my duty as a human being and my mission and my promise in this regard, without deriving power from it in any form whatsoever, without making profit from it, without being arrogant, sectarian, lying, unjust and domineering or indulging in idleness, exploiting my fellow human beings or oppressing, harassing or enslaving, servant or deceiving them, etc. I would like to say this very clearly and plainly for all those who slanderously spread other things about me, who expect me to do all the things and malignities I have mentioned and try to blame me.
Contact Report 338.
As a result of my ignorance, the question has arisen in me as to what the total block of consciousness of the human being is formed from. Since the creation of the spirit forms by the creation, has this block been created from the ground up by a creative law in such a way that every spirit form has one attached to it? Or does it form a separate unit which only comes into being in a human being when a spirit form reincarnates in him?
Man's entire block of consciousness may well be based on a creative law, but it is not integrated into the spirit form from the ground up. In fact, this block is only created by the spirit form itself, by the power of the creative law that the spirit form must also consist of the two poles negative and positive in the existence of the material body. The spirit form itself forms the positive value, while the total block of consciousness embodies the negative value, which is directly related to the material consciousness emanating from it, which influences itself by its own power to form thoughts and also evolves itself. At the same time, the material consciousness is also connected in a special form with the whole material body, which is why it is also said that the material body forms the negative value. This is also true with regard to animals, etc., except that here there is a total instinct consciousness, and thus no conscious awareness. But now back to the spirit form, which creates the total block of consciousness in humans, or in the animal world, etc., the total instinct consciousness block. First, there is a still ignorant new spirit form, in humans as well as in animals, etc., which does not yet have a total block of consciousness, that is to say, total instinct consciousness, whereby from this block a human consciousness, that is to say a material consciousness, or in animals, etc., an animal instinct consciousness could be created. And when we speak only of human beings, a new spirit that is still ignorant and that inhabits a material body for the first time will be subject to the creative law, which is impulsively stored in the spirit form, of creating a total block of consciousness from within itself. This then creates out of itself again the conscious material consciousness and thus the actual personality, which then copes with the material life, learns, and after the death of the material body passes away again. Connected with the spirit form, which after the death of the material body changes into its own afterlife, the same happens with the total block of consciousness, which also enters its own afterlife. In this area, the block works through its neutral energy together with the personality to completely process everything that has not yet been processed from the past and present life. When this processing is completed, the personality is dissolved by the power and energy of the total block of consciousness into pure neutral energy, which no longer contains any old personality impulses. This neutral spiritual energy is then used by the entire block of consciousness to create an absolutely new personality, and thus a new consciousness, which no longer has any similarities whatsoever with the dissolved and past personality or with the old consciousness. This new personality is then born together with the reincarnatable spirit form and its total consciousness block in a new human body. From this, it also follows that no personality and therefore no human being can be reborn, because this is reserved solely for the everlasting spirit form. Only the spirit form is thus classified by the creative laws of rebirth, but not the personality.
Contact Report 345 and note. The following excerpt concerns a civilization of humans living on a planet in a foreign universe. Please see the full contact report for context.
But what happens to the deceased human beings? I mean, how are they laid to rest, cremated or buried, etc.?
The deceased are laid out upon a stone bed far away from residential areas and especially created for them. Individual small yet very stable stone houses, after which the entrance is closed with rocks and boulders. After that, the deceased are left to decompose.
Do you mean by this something like a vault? Is it with the bereaved then also, as is usual on earth, that they visit these tombs?
No, this does not likewise belong to tradition, as well as also not the decoration of tombs with flowers, etc. Also, no inscriptions are displayed, and no ritual at all is indulged in at the burial. Among all races exists also no fear of dying and death. The whole thing is considered and honored as a natural and inevitable event.
Contact Report 360.
And finally, it must be explained that on all worlds in the universe that bear higher and higher life, the evolutionary course to man, or the incarnation through evolution, is the same, and consequently primate beings or first beings arise everywhere, from which on the one hand the genus man develops through further evolution, while the remaining first beings fall victim to a degeneration of the form of consciousness, and thus remain primates or become ape beings, as they are called by the terrestrial human being.
Contact Report 367.
But another question I am always being asked. Even in your country, deceased bodies are burned at will. I am always asked why you do this, because the burning of the body destroys the fluid vibrations. Although I know that this is not the case, because the skeleton is preserved when the body is burned, it would be interesting to know why this is so.
Burning is a process of cold fire that does not produce heat. You can imagine it as if something is burned and dissolved with dry ice. So the cold fire only dissolves the actual body without affecting the skeleton. Through the process of the cold fire burning, the mental fluid vibration of the human being settles into the skeleton and is thus preserved, whereby the following personalities can use the powers again when they are born through the rebirth of the spirit form and the total consciousness block.
Short, concise, and clear. Unfortunately not yet possible with us. Well then, I suppose, after this cold burning process, the skeleton is buried.
That's correct. In this regard, we have burials in graves and catacombs, as well as burials in small ossuaries far away from residential areas.
Contact Report 384 Kitchen Conversation from the 28th of November, 1984. In the same way, however, this also happens in a neutral way when the mental fluid forces are deposited in rooms, places or objects, which can then be used again by the next personality after its birth. It follows that new personalities can then adopt and express the characteristics and behavior, etc. of their old personalities. However, this is not obligatory, because it is solely up to each individual personality whether or not it accepts or does not accept the neutral in the deposited mental vibrations and their energies and forces old peculiarities, and behaviors through reconnect ions. Contact Report 398 Prophecy and Prediction 2. So I see and grasp things through time until the most distant future, which is still hidden from the earthly man. Many years will have passed when my prophecies and predictions have been fulfilled, and a new and better time will begin. 133. As ever. Even in the third millennium, the terrestrial human being will for a long time not know why he lives and dies, what death means and what rebirth and birth means. For as ever he will uselessly wave his arms in vain, searching in vain for the truth of creation and its laws and commandments, because he will cling, as he has done since ancient times, to the religions and sects that make him whimper like little children. 162. And it will be at that time that mankind will remember the prophecies of the true prophets, and what once was in all the past. Just as they will know what the future will be, because they will be able to see, through foresight, the events and the course and changes of the world, of humanity and of the universe, as well as the mystery of living and dying, and therefore will no longer be afraid of their own death. For they will know that life is eternal, alternating with the life of death and the new life on earth, as determined by creation through its unshakable laws, which are unchanging and eternally valid. Contact Report 440 to Question 1, Billy's answer to questions from Johannes Buchholz. I teach the facts of the spiritual teaching also with regard to the truth of the effective possibilities of favoring the laws of nature. So the whole thing forms a common basis, namely the rejection of angels, gods and demons, etc. Because they are schizophrenic and believing fantasy figures, namely the representation of the doctrine of truth, as well as the doctrine of the favorable treatment of the laws of nature, if they are correctly followed. With this, however, it is not possible for error and falsehood to attune oneself to the pure being, for this is not possible for any human being, even if he has the rank of an Ishwish or Srut. The latter is classified in the highest possible form of the evolution of consciousness that a human being can achieve before he puts down his material body and dives into the purely spiritual planes, of which there is no longer any connection to the material world and to human beings. Consequently, incarnations or reincarnations into the material world can no longer take place from the spiritual planes. This was the time of the existence of the creation, that is to say of the about 46 trillion years old universe. For very specific and special reasons only once possible with regard to Nocodemion. But this was only possible through the pure spirit plane Arahat Athasata in cooperation with the highest pure spirit plane Partali 12 billion years ago, and since then never again. To Question 3, Billy's answer to questions from Johannes Buchholz. It is well known that after dying, the personality is dissolved by the total consciousness block into pure neutral energy, from which the G block creates a completely new personality with a completely new consciousness. It is this new form of consciousness personality, which has no longer any relation to the former form consciousness personality, that is then born, together with the reincarnation of the spirit form, to which the total consciousness block also belongs. See rebirth, life, dying, death and mourning, Wasser Manzeit Verlag. So it is absolutely impossible that a once-lived personality can be reborn or reincarnated, because the old teachings of Hinduism and Buddhism etc. are pure charlatanism, just like the false doctrine that the human spirit or personality and its consciousness can be reborn in an animal form. Answer Billy's answer to questions from Johannes Buchholz. With regard to the descriptions of reincarnation in the following way. In the Puranas, rare possibilities of temporary human rebirth in animal bodies are also described, where the spirit form may be aware of its previous incarnation, and where the animal form may have served previous human offenses against natural laws. Sometimes as a result of being cursed by other people, or by clinging to certain thoughts of an animal form in the last moment of human life. Is there such a thing? I am actually not surprised that you simply accept all this nonsense and bullshit without hesitation, and believe what you have written, and are obviously impressed and biased by it. But no. It is really pure nonsense that a human spirit form can reincarnate in an animal form. Neither as a result of previous human infringements, nor as a result of being cursed by other people, nor by clinging to certain thoughts of an animal form in the last moment of human life. With regard to these things, I would like to recommend my book Rebirth, Life, Dying, Death and Mourning, The question from your description, the new life, is not built on the burdens of the former life. Because these were mastered in their entirety in the former life, the question arises. Often life ends abruptly, without having had time to master obvious mistakes or burdens. You start again where you left off, right? Of course, man begins his new life where the last one left off. The exact facts can be found in the above-mentioned book Rebirth, Life, Dying, Death and Mourning, which is recommended to read and study, because it describes all the things and facts that provide exhaustive information on the whole subject of all your questions concerning rebirth, the hereafter, etc., etc. Contact Report 469. What the truth may tell us. Consciousness and psyche of all creatures, in turn, are on a journey through time and through the countless manifestations of life, encompassing many physical existences. And in this process death is a lead to a new birth, as well as the transformation into the world of the hereafter and the purely spiritual. Christianity also intervened in the life after death, as a result of which the faithful since the existence of the Catholic Church have fallen into terrible obsessions. The rebirth of the spirit form is strictly denied, and the hereafter is presented as a kind of limbo called purgatory, and as actual hell. Contrary to this, heaven was invented, in which a god supposedly has his residence and welcomes into his kingdom all those who piously dance to his violin. And with reference to this psychotic fantasy, the Christian religion, as well as sects and certain other religions, claims that heaven is virtually the terminus for human life. But anyone who fundamentally sins against the Christian faith and everything connected with it will inevitably end up in hell for eternity, and will have to suffer endless and terrible torture there. But all people who die, except the saints, cannot go straight to heaven in the process. For everyone must first be purified by purgatory, and this over a period of millions of years, in order to become purified and worthy of heaven in the form of alleviated tortures in hell, and thus to attain heavenly purity. If we take a look at all this Christian religious nonsense, we can see that the whole thing is an extraordinarily underdeveloped attitude of consciousness that could only develop from a sick human brain. And every human being who study the relevant religious writings of Christianity and the other religions and sects of the same or similar orientation must recognize, if they are capable of clear thinking and reason, that the authors and advocates of all these absurdities are and were psychopaths throughout, who transferred their own irrational fears and delusions to their pathologically stupid and primitive, false, idiotic and incomprehensible heresies. Seen in this way as a whole, the religious and sectarian teachings of life and of the last things of all existence are not just one great error, but an all-encompassing, misleading and malicious lie, through which innumerable human beings go astray, far from the truth, to rot in ignorance of untruth. This is because, through the false teachings of religions and sects, philosophies and ideologies, they are given a completely false and frightening idea of life and of the effective truth and of the real creative laws and commandments. And so, all religions and sects, all philosophies and ideologies, and all human beings who adhere to them, have simply not grasped the true meaning of truth. Contact Report 499.
Once again, I would like to bring the language to the so-called regressions to past lives that are done by certain charlatans, etc., by putting people under hypnosis and then having some crazy regressions that are not in accordance with the truth of past lives. Recently, I had another question about this, explaining the fact that hypnotized people usually only fantasize about recollections or reproduce any of their own memories or those of other human beings who have read, experienced or heard them in the present life, etc. This charlatan hypnotizing and recalling usually happens precisely because the hypnotist does not have sufficient skills to put the hypnotized person into a trance state through which he can retrieve information from his own memory banks. With sufficient abilities and the necessary skills and knowledge, such information regarding one's own former persons can also be retrieved through a meditative state, as it is also possible through hypnosis, when there is a real expert in hypnotic abilities. As I am not sufficiently engaged with this to be able to orientate myself about what is being done in this field on Earth, I would like to ask you if you know more about this, and if in the meantime, as we have talked about these things, there are now specialists in hypnosis who are able to bring about real regressions by retrieving information from the memory banks. I am not referring to the practices carried out by well-known charlatans for the sake of money, but I am thinking of really good professionals in hypnosis who are capable of influencing their hypnotized persons in such a way that they can retrieve real and truthful information from their own memory banks.
It is a number of years since we last had a private conversation on this subject. And since we are also observing these things you mentioned according to our clarification work, as you know, I can tell you that in the meantime it has become apparent that a few specialists in hypnosis have developed who are able to make real regressions by guiding those they hypnotize in such a way that they can retrieve true information from their own memory banks. However, the number of those who are capable of hypnosis is not great, so that we cannot speak of a general progress in these matters.
Contact Report 538.
But now a question about the slanderer in AEI, who has been publicly slandering me for well over 20 years all over the world, what personality he had in his former life, and what he had been, etc.
The former personality, respectively the person who existed in his last life of the person living today, was Florian Bach, who, besides other false names, also took the name Emil Wallenberg from a novel, with the result that he died in Neukirchen on the 18th of October in the year 1893 by the jury court for an attempt to rob and murder a shoemaker's apprentice in August 1877. He had not committed this crime, but someone else, namely a day laborer named Johann Skarke. Florian Bach was born on the 14th of July, 1863 in Bavaria and was a good-for-nothing and criminal. At an early age, he was put in a reformatory in a place called Breitenau for several years, after which he became a tramp and hobo and worked as a beggar, thief, and burglar in Germany and Austria. Judged by the courts as an incorrigible antisocial element, he was sentenced to prison in over 50 cases.
But the bad character of this Florian Bach is obviously also in the successor Broken Through, just in a different way. According to the dates mentioned above, there was only a short stay in the afterlife from the old to the new personality, which is perhaps the reason why the present personality, respectively person, is still strongly affected by the impulses of Florian Bach, which are stored in the memory banks, and which he uses for his bad machinations, because he is not able to control them.
This possibility may be true.
Contact Report 570.
In this respect, about 13,500 years ago, when the mission started again, those who directly and indirectly carried or fulfilled the mission took an oath to cooperate in every new missionary activity for the rest of their lives. This refers, however, to the fact that the oath applied to all the persons of that time, who will of course also appear in the future as new personalities of a new incarnation, and who will be assigned to the mission and committed to it. The last time this obligation applies in relation to the present mission, which has to be fulfilled now and in the future, and which ends with the year 3999 for all the persons connected with it. Until then, each personality involved in the mission will have a lifelong commitment to fulfill its missionary duties, provided, however, that the personality in question finds its way into the direct sphere of the person fulfilling the mission, which in this specific case is the active teaching members of Phi Gui, both now and in the future.
What is it like when this oath is broken, which present and future persons do not remember?
Of course, every personality is free to voluntarily engage in the mission and its duties, and also to realize that there is a deep connection to it. This deep insight arises in every personality connected with the mission as a presentiment about the old oath, so it cannot be said that there is no memory of it. When this oath is broken by a personality, it distances itself from the fulfillment of duty sworn by its former personality, which lasts until the year 3999. The consequence of which is that the whole course of evolution is correspondingly cumbersome and difficult, as is the case with all the human beings who are not mission-related and therefore not directly involved in it from a doctrinal point of view.
So there is no delinquency in the sense of the word, but rather a serious evolutionary hindrance, which means, so to speak, that there is a damage that hinders evolution, whereby the evolutionary progress in life is as laborious, cumbersome, difficult, and always recoiling as it is usual with the human being.
That is the case, yes.
Contact Report 579.
In the Nacademian storage banks, I have learned a word regarding the difference between the spirit and the human, which vividly presents that the spirit of the human is a tiny part of creation energy in the human. So this can with the human, for example, in a way be compared to, as the human body is similar to a guest house, in which the spirit stays as guest, where it also feeds itself and makes payment for this. If the guest house, however, is demolished or somehow destroyed, then the spirit, which indeed is guest, leaves the place of destruction. For humans is to be realized that this means that the spirit in him as guest lives and learns, receives food and lodging, and at the same time it enlivens, pays for food and lodging to the entire body. And when the human dies, then the spirit escapes immediately from the body and goes over into its beyond area, in order then with the next new personality in the next life again in it, to become bound and to be a new guest in a new human body. When the spirit leaves the human body, then it escapes into its beyond plane, which exists in the same space as the present reality of the planet, though the so-called beyond plane is in another dimension in comparison to the real material reality space, and I mean in finest spiritual energetic nature. Regarding the planet, the beyond plane therefore is arranged around it, like this plane, however, also is further existing universe-wide, however in contrast to the material reality plane in a finest material, to which the human as material life form in no way has access, and consequently nothing can be seen and nothing detected. Therefore, is it in this plane impossible for human to see or somehow detect the material body escaping spirit, respectively spirit form? That the beyond area of the planet in a differently dimensioned form than the real material reality space is not only arranged for it, but also in the entire universe. This has its reason. So emerges from the spirit teachings that if a planet is destroyed or simply made incapable of life, that the on there existing spirit forms and the other lying fallow spirit energies then are not destroyed, but that these emigrate in order to travel for so long through space until a new planet is found, on which human life exists. On this planet the spirit forms settle, then again mix themselves with the already there existing ones, and so go forward again, respectively, further into a cycle of reincarnation, respectively, rebirth.
Contact Report 614.
The doctrine of truth, doctrine of the spirit, doctrine of life is thus founded in creative, natural truths which are given in reality, and which also make it clear that man has at his disposal a tiny part of the spirit of creation, which enlivens him as a spiritual form, and is capable of reincarnation, which also states that man in his existence is a being which is not limited to just one life, but through many new incarnations lives on again and again as new personalities. This means that not the human being as such, but only his spiritual form is reincarnated or reborn, while the human being passes away in death as such with his consciousness and personality, and is transformed into a new, neutral energy from which a new consciousness with a new personality is created by the total block of consciousness created by the spiritual form in the afterlife area. The new personality is then born into the new human body on the 21st day after the conception of a new human body, together and at the same moment in which the spiritual form also reincarnates into the new body, namely into the colliculus superior in the roof of the midbrain, paired nodal point, whereby the physical body and thus also the consciousness is enlivened and the pure instinctual state of the fetus, which existed until then for 21 days, is awakened to effective life. This enables the new human being or his new consciousness with his new personality to develop, whereby in the course of time after birth he can effectively exceed all possibilities he thinks he has. Through the proper functioning of his consciousness and thoughts, he will not only be able to solve all his personal problems and achieve his self-imposed goals, but he will actually be able to expand his consciousness and create knowledge, wisdom, and love, as well as balance and peace, freedom and harmony within himself and for his environment.
Contact Report 622.
The meaning of human life lies in the development of consciousness. Therefore, he should get to know and consciously perceive, learn, and obey the creative laws and commandments, also out of his own free will. For this man is given his own free will, but on the other hand also responsibility is imposed on him, which he has to perceive, but also again in pros and cons concerning his own decision and his own free will. Through his own deliberate decisions and the resulting consequences, he must learn what is constructive, good, positive and right, beneficial, and what is not. And the consequences resulting from his decisions are then also what shape his human individuality and quality, whereby it must be noted, however, that from the spiritual origin all human beings are equal, namely by being equipped with a spiritual form which is capable of reincarnation and evolution, which is in all human beings constantly of purely spiritual, energetic, and constant form, and which also enlivens man. This while on the other hand, every human being is fundamentally different from every other in terms of his or her sense of consciousness, personality, character, and behavior.
Contact Report 650.
Then the following, which would interest me, namely the matter of the little more than 144,000 extraterrestrials who came to Earth from the subsequent peoples of Nakademion and also died here. Their spirit forms were and are since then on Earth, of course, always classified as reincarnation, even in bodies of newborn personalities again and again. It must be said, however, that these 144,000 or so people must in no way be associated with the alleged 144,000 light beings from the Santinians who are supposed to live on Earth, which corresponds to complete nonsense. Also absurd is the Christian religious assertion that allegedly 144,000 are chosen, according to Christian faith. Of course, only Christians should be the ones who are therefore favored by the Christian religion and its sects, who are to be deprived and saved when the world perishes, as already absurdly claimed in the Bible. But what interests me now is, where do the 144,000 spirit forms enliven today's people? Or where do the associated personalities live today who came to Earth about 13,500 years ago? And my question only refers to these 144,000, but not to others of the same number. To my knowledge, they should at the present time be scattered all over the entire Earth, indeed mostly one by one, as it emerges from the Nocademian storage bank.
The little more than 144,000 spirit forms of the then distant descendants from Nocademian peoples, who immigrated to Earth about 13,500 years ago, exist at present partly in living personalities, which are scattered all over Earth practically in all peoples, whereby they usually live their lives individually. Today there are also a few small groups, but they are really very small, and consist of only a few people, and are concerned with the teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life. These new personalities have come together in modern times, whose primeval ancestors came to Earth from foreign worlds at an early age, to form small groups from the 144,000 or so Nocademian peoples, as a result of the missionary spread emanating from you and the Figu. Thus it is said that these small groupings have arisen from the ongoing mission efforts, whereby among these groupings there are, of course, not only personalities who come from the 144,000 or so former successors of Nocademion, but there are also persons among them who possess pure Earth-created spirit forms, following that they are pure Earth humans. But also these, or at least a part of them, are oriented towards the creative natural laws and commandments as taught by the doctrine, and also with them everything happens apart from religions and sects. And it must still be said that of course only a certain part of each of the 144,000 or so spirit forms enlivens new personalities who are in current lives, whereby we assume an estimate of about half in this respect.
So about half, then they are quite thinly sown in the mass Earth humanity of more than 8.5 billion.
All those of these extraterrestrial immigrants who remained on Earth also died there, and since then their spiritual forms have also reincarnated and will continue to reincarnate on Earth, precisely in ever-new personalities of newly born Earth humans. So the 144,000 emigrants and their superiors and leaders were integrated worldwide as instructors into all existing earthly peoples and large tribes, as well as various groups in which they had to act as instructors. And like I said, many also fulfilled this obligation and thus led Earth humanity in technical, medical, and scientific regard on a higher level, however always in accordance with the possibilities prevailing at that time and also further on Earth. In this way, everything has been carried and developed since then up to the present time, consequently by the descendants of the old extraterrestrial immigrants from the Nocademian descendants who came to Earth, who since then have been born again and again as new personalities and continue to be born, innovations in medicine and technology, etc., as well as new insights and expanded knowledge have been brought and continue to be brought. If for a moment yes, here yes, our annals refer to a number of 8 different emigration powers of 144,000 persons each and 228 superiors each, who came to Earth in the course of more than 2 million years from the Nocademian descendant peoples. And here is a total number of 151,128 people who were involved. Of these persons, 575 and 14 remained on Earth, died there, and are born again with their old reincarnating spirit forms as new personalities.
Contact Report 658 Spirit and Consciousness. The spirit or spirit form of man and other life forms is classified as reincarnation or rebirth, which is not the case for consciousness and its energy and power. The human spirit or spirit energy collects knowledge from the human consciousness impulsively and accumulates it into wisdom or impulse-impregnated energy. So everything happens purely in terms of impulse energy and therefore has nothing to do with thoughts or thinking, as it is peculiar to consciousness alone. In the Nocodemian memory banks I learned a word about the difference between the spirit and the human being that clearly shows that the human spirit is a tiny part of the human spirit of creation. Thus the human body can be compared with the human being, for example, by comparing the human body with an inn where the spirit lingers as a guest, where it also nourishes itself and pays for it. But if the inn is torn down or otherwise destroyed, then the spirit, who is the guest, leaves the place of destruction. Applied to man, this means that the spirit lives and learns in him, as a guest receives food and lodging, and at the same time enlivens the entire body, pays for food and lodging. And when man dies, the spirit immediately escapes from the body and passes into his afterlife area, only to be bound to it again in the next new personality, in the next life, and to be a new guest in the new human body. When the spirit leaves the human body, it escapes into its afterlife plane, which exists in the same space as the present reality of the planet, whereby the so-called afterlife plane is dimensioned differently from the real material reality space, namely in the finest material spiritual energetic nature. In relation to the planet, then, the plane beyond is arranged around it, just as this plane continues to exist universe-wide. But in relation to the material plane of reality, in a subtle material plane to which man, as a material form of life, has no access whatsoever, and consequently cannot see or perceive anything, and cannot communicate with the other. So in this plane it is impossible for a person to see or otherwise perceive the spirit, or the spiritual form, that has escaped from the material body, or to somehow communicate with it. The fact that the otherworldly realm of the planet is arranged in a different dimension than the real material space of reality, not only in this space, but also in the entire universe, has its justification. Thus it follows from the spiritual teachings that when a planet is destroyed or simply becomes unviable, then the existing spirit forms and other unused spirit energies on it are not destroyed, but are migrated to move through the world space until a new planet is found on which human life exists. On this planet the spirit forms or spirit energies then settle again, mix with already existing ones there and reach again, or further into a cycle of reincarnation, or rebirth. Contact Report 662 Question. Every life form possesses a spirit form, which incarnated for the first time, as a new spirit form in this time. What determines whether a new spirit form incarnates into a certain life form, or whether a spirit form reincarnates into a certain life form? Answer. There is no determination that a spirit form incarnates into a certain life form, but only a determination into which genus, species a spirit form reincarnates. The facts of the matter are this. Around every planet, and throughout the universe exists the creative spirit energetic mass, from which every tiny spirit form for every material form of life emerges. The spirit form by which individuals are enlivened forms itself from the ground up according to the corresponding life forms when it enters, or is born into a form of life, as only a tiny new spirit form, or as a neutral positive, tiny spirit forming mass. The entire great mass of the spirit form, which encompasses all planets and world space objects and the entire universe, exists in its own universe-wide spirit energetic sphere, but is absolutely neutral pulsing and ineffective in its original state. In this form, the entire mass of spirit form lies fallow, and has never been bound to any form of life. A binding of a clusters of spirit forms to an indefinite form of life only arises when a tiny separation of the spirit from the entire neutral planetary and universal mass of spiritual energy takes place. Thus, a tiny fragment of spiritual energy separation from the entire planetary, that is to say universal spiritual form energy, is created and forms a new spirit form. If a new life form of any genus or species has to be committed by a new spirit form, if this is the case, then the new spirit form, which has never before incarnated or reincarnated, gives birth as neutral spirit form energy, a spirit form agglomeration into the new material life form, which can belong to any genus or species. The tiny fragment agglomeration of new spirits is invisible, and when it is first incarnated in the brain of an individual, regardless of genus or species, it immediately harmonizes itself harmoniously with the form of life concerned and programs itself, so to speak, on the individual concerned. This, when a neutral spirit energetic mass, which is a tiny fragment, is first born or incarnated into a human being as a new spirit form, then it determines itself impulsively as a human spirit form and remains so for all time. If, on the other hand, a neutral new spirit form moves into another life form of another genus or species, such as an animal, reptile, bird or fish, then it programs itself on it and thus becomes the spirit form of an animal, reptile, bird or fish. So the new spirit form adapts itself to the first individual form that enlivens it, only to reincarnate itself into a similar individual form again and again after each passing of the corresponding life form. The new spirit form, which through the first incarnation has impulsively begun to evolutionize in the individual, is thus from now on assigned to the same individual line and reincarnates only in this line. Every neutral new spirit form that incarnates for the first time in the brain of an individual is therefore absolutely neutral in every form. Follows this also neither male nor female, but absolutely specific to a certain life form and individuality and its continuous lifeline. Only then, however, when the spirit form moves into the brain of an individual and animates it in humans in the roof of the midbrain equals paired node equals collicular superior, because a living brain requires this, does the human spirit form develop into the correspondingly necessary form. And so in man the spirit form is called the human spirit form, in other life forms accordingly the animal, android or any other necessary, and according to the individual-oriented spirit form. Only through the first entry of the tiny fragment, new spirit form or spirit form energy into the brain of an individual does it develop into the life form and the spirit form belonging to it and named after its species. Contact Report 664.
Man should never forget to have a real, good and positive dream for self-control and self-esteem and self-realization in order to be a true, honorable and worthy man who through his healthy thoughts and feelings can also perceive, experience and understand that he is a true man among his peers in his actions, deeds, and behavior. He must know that he really lives his dream and carries it into the future until his death, which he can face with honor and dignity, and say that he has lived his life in a decent, honorable, worthy, and humane way in joy, love, and contentment.
Contact Report 668.
Something goes through my mind, so I want to make sure that I remember the words of your father Svath when he explained to me that if a person falls into mourning, this has to be overcome within 10-14 days, otherwise he will suffer mental psychic conscious damage resulting from depression. Thank you. Then, sadness and depression are basically two different factors, but sadness can trigger depression, which is primarily caused by the loss of a loved one, which is quite normal, regardless of whether the loss is caused by death or separation. These two types of grief are therefore a natural reaction to the loss of a human being, while grief can also affect a human being in other ways, such as by the loss of something on which the human being is attached and which he or she loves. This can be very diverse, as for example the loss of an animal, an object, photos, or the homeland, etc. Thus, in this way, innumerable can be considered as a loss which triggers grief. However, the strength of grief can vary greatly from person to person, with age also playing a role, so it can vary greatly between young and older or old people. If the basic features of mourning are taken into account, they are the same for all people. But the depth and experience of mourning, the length of mourning, and the memory of mourning vary greatly. It is unavoidable that during a period of mourning a person feels extremely depressed and very vulnerable, hardly interested in anything and no energy, no properly functioning memory, and no longer has any strength. In addition, he falls into apathy, loss of appetite and concentration, as well as insomnia, which can lead to depression if these conditions and grief last more than 10 to 14 days and are not ended rationally. Physical complaints can also occur, such as intestinal and stomach disorders, which are often associated with diarrhea. So the sadness is very similar to depression, but not the same. While both are similar states, there are differences between these two states of thought, feel, psychic consciousness. A grief, however profound it may be, can be alleviated and finally ended by man himself, by his grief work and the grief process to be lived through. And he can do this by learning, through the processing of mourning, to detach himself from that which is old in order to turn to the new, or by detaching himself from that which has elapsed and gone, in order to turn to the new and thus to life again. As Svath taught me, there are basically 4 important phases to consider in a grieving process, in order to get over the grief and thus also over the loss in a reasonable time. We have talked about this before, and some things have been clarified, but I would like to say the following today. 1. First, when a loss occurs, there is a protest and a denial of the unchangeable fact, because the whole thing does not want to be realized. So first there is a state of thought and behavior of that, as if nothing had happened and everything had remained the same as before. 2. The whole situation is properly realized, perceiving the loss but creating a despair that causes fear of the loss suffered, leading to an emotional outburst and confusion with fear, pain, guilt, and anger. 3. Now follows the perception and recognition of the loss, whereby this and the separation are slowly accepted, as well as a detachment and, so to speak, a parting from the loss suffered. Thus the inner relationship to what appeared as a loss changes. At least if it is a human being, a new inner memorable connection to him is built up, while the attention and all senses are again directed to the outside world. 4. Through the reperception and returning to the outside and the environment, the return to the current life takes place, whereby the interest for one's own existence and life, as well as for events in the environment and the need for new social relationships, are openly awakened again. The human being has the possibility through mourning to process a loss and the associated pain of loss in a thought, emotional, psychic, conscious way, and also to cope with it without breaking down. But that means that he has to use his mind and his reason and does not cultivate mourning endlessly, because otherwise depressions inevitably occur that are very difficult to deal with. The mourning rites and the forms of mourning are very different in the different cultures, but the goal is always the same, namely to protect the thoughts, feelings, and psyche as well as the consciousness from a serious damage. You can see the difference to a depression. Normally, grief disappears on its own, even if it takes some time. And this usually also occurs when the first depressive attacks can occur after 10-14 days. But these are not relevant if the coping with grief is ended in a good way after a few more days, at most 3 to 4 days. However, if the depression then takes hold during this time, it usually persists, but only if nothing is done about it. An unresolved grief can become a depression in a short time if the loss suffered is not overcome by reason, or if several losses occur in quick succession. If this is the case, then the loss mourning continues in such a way that the mourning person no longer comes out of it, whereby depressions inevitably become.
If this is the case, then specialist medical help is unavoidable before the depression becomes chronic. In mourning or depression, as you mentioned, losses related to people, animals, a home, or objects, etc., can also be included as causes. It should be noted that mourning and depression are clinically different, although mourning processes can also degenerate into different forms, which I will briefly mention. 1. Pathological grief. If such a one appears, then a denial of reality takes place, whereby the person concerned cannot in any way feel grief and sorrow, because effectively a lack of sorrow is given. Such missed grief can lead to depression and psychosomatic illness. This condition can occur as a direct consequence of loss, but can also be delayed because it does not break out until later. 2. Long-term grief. This results from the fact that grief is delayed for a longer period of time and expresses itself much more intensively than in normal cases, namely because it is exaggerated and chronically degenerates. 3. Employment grief. In this case, the human being is increasingly concerned with the object of the loss suffered with his thoughts, feelings, psyche, and consciousness, instead of freeing himself from it in his thoughts. Burying yourself in mourning. This kind of sadness results from the fact that the human being withdraws in his thought, feel, psych, consciousness pain in relation to the social life in strong or complete way, even isolates himself from his relatives and acquaintances, etc. in his thought, feel, psych, consciousness. 5. Cold sorrow. This results in a state of chronic grief over a longer period of mourning, with the result that life is stopped and no longer taken into account, so to speak. And after the loss, an adaptation to existence and life is no longer taken into account, and there is also no longer any interest in it. It is important that mourning processes are clearly distinguished from depression, because it is a fact that on the one hand, a mourning process is often overlooked, but on the other hand, it is misinterpreted as depression. Mourning and depression are basically similar but different, which is why mourning must be clearly defined. Grief produces a state of mourning, which is determined and expressed by emotional surges, emotional paralysis, pain and feelings of guilt, fear of loss and separation, grievance, loss of the goal of life, emptiness and void of the world, unhappiness, joylessness, helplessness, social withdrawal, loss of relationships, crying, thoughts of lost and loss, inactivity and lack of appetite, etc. An irrational search for what has been lost and lost is just as much a consequence of grief as an emerging disorientation and disorganization. Grief is also a phase-like process, especially when a person is lost, where thought-feel numbness occurs as a result of a shock phase, which can also trigger a physical breakdown and outbursts of affect, as well as a state of inability to accept the loss. But such a phase process also produces a paralyzed withdrawal, sheer despair, sorrow, and longing, as well as aggression.
Contact Report 680.
But for many human beings, it is completely unclear whether life after death exists, because they also cannot explain how their consciousness is created. I learned from your father Sfath at a young age, as well as later and up to now again and again from the memory banks of Nocodemion, that the exchange of information between the material human consciousness and the spirit energetic world of creation is responsible for the existence of consciousness. No earthling has been able to explain this up to now, so that no one could really teach that even after death a consciousness continues to exist impulse energetically, but not up to date anymore, but in the form of, as I said, impulse energy of consciousness and knowledge, which is stored in the memory banks, while on the other hand, the content of the material consciousness after dying is dissolved in the level of the total consciousness block, after which a new consciousness as well as a new subconsciousness and even a new personality are created for the successor personality, and these are then born as one block. Unfortunately, the Earthlings resist these explanations, especially the scientists who deal with this matter, because their consciousness resists every explanation that is incomprehensible to them. But in fact, the material world is not everything, because there is more than just the material. If quantum physics is used for this purpose, it provides decisive indications and proof, even in much deeper forms, that there is much more than just the material and visible, but also everything that is detached from the material world and from space and time, and exists in purely spiritual energetic levels. And this world is not simply the image of the inner world of human beings, but fundamentally it represents the entire spirit energy structure of creation, respectively, the creation of universal consciousness. Nevertheless, these two world forms, the material and the spiritual world, are closely connected with each other, so that there is an intensive exchange of information between them. And this exchange of information takes place through the levels of the memory banks and the total consciousness block, which is also the one that creates the consciousness of human beings, and which therefore provides for a new one after dying and in the life of death. When we look at our universe, then from this, a prominent creativity emerges, from which something new is constantly being created in infinite diversity. And this is where the inner and the other world come into play. Seen from the human being's point of view, everything new in the universe originates in the material world. But this is fundamentally wrong, because first everything and everything originates in impulsive spirit energetic form. And through this, the exchange of information from the spirit energetic world with the material world is created. However, it must be remembered that everything in the spirit energy world of creation universal consciousness is all permanent, whereas in the material world, everything old and new is inevitably transitory. Basically, at some point in the material world, everything has come into existence anew, but it has also passed away again. But if everything that ever existed in the material world has long since disappeared from it, then everything in the spirit energy world has remained and remains all permanent and represents a perfect memory that can never be erased and can never pass away. And therefore it also remains and is imperishable through all 1049 forms of creation, and all 6 absolute forms up to the being absolutum. The material body of the human being is extremely active, and on the molecular level it always produces something new, so also the change of the manifold life forms, as well as the organic change of the human being. At the same time, the exchange of information with the spirit energy world takes place. Consequently, every human being, like every other life form of perishable material body, also has an imperishable body in the inner world, which is connected with the spirit energy world of the creation universal consciousness. Every material body dies sometime, but with death only the material activity of the material consciousness, and therefore also of the body, is ended, whereby it falls prey to decay. But the imperishable spirit energy form that animates the body survives death, which means that, in connection with a new material body, new life arises from death. This also clarifies the question of how consciousness is created, because if it were created entirely by the material brain, then death would mean the absolute end of it altogether. So the assertion of neurological research is completely wrong that, due to ignorance of the spiritual energetic impulses from which the new consciousness arises from the level of the otherworldly total consciousness block, consciousness arises from the activity of the neurons. If we look at the workings of human consciousness, then it can actually be said that it creates abstract information that appears in the brain language center and is formed as thoughts that are expressed as words and also create feelings. And this abstract information does not come about through the activity of the neurons, but through the exchange of information with the spirit energy world. This could not be shown so far, despite intensive efforts of the neurosciences. Effectively, therefore, the information is supplied by the exchange of information between the spiritual energetic level of creation, universal consciousness, and the material consciousness, whereby this factor leads to the fact that information keeps appearing in the active brain of human beings, as it is also the case with regard to ideas that manifest themselves in the subconsciousness, as I have described it according to the spiritual teachings in the article Origin of the Idea. Note Ursprung aller Existenz, page 37, and Diversicum, page 372. So it is not simply information coming from the inside of the body, respectively, from the neurons, although these and the whole brain itself play a very important role, because the neuron and brain block ensure that the unconsciously received information is put together in an orderly and logical way. So all this together creates the material consciousness, respectively its content, respectively the close connections between the spirit energy level as well as the activity and the content of the material consciousness and the working of the brain. It is therefore very decisive that the material consciousness of human beings is not produced by the brain, but from the spiritual energetic world of the so-called universal consciousness or creation universal consciousness, whereby the whole thing in this respect embodies nothing other than an impulse memory of spiritual energetic electromagnetic nature, which is called universal consciousness, respectively creation universal consciousness only for the sake of human understanding. And this is therefore the key to life after death and the life of death, whereby in the afterlife level of the total block of consciousness, the information budget of human consciousness is dissolved, after which the total block of consciousness creates a new content potential as a new block of consciousness, which is then born as material consciousness, together with a likewise new subconsciousness, as well as with the new personality in a new human body. The block of information in the human consciousness does not survive death, nor does the body. As a result, after death it is no longer the brain that ensures the orderly composition of a new consciousness, but rather the total block of consciousness, which is spirit formed in its existence and is also integrated in the universal consciousness. This means that after death, the content of the consciousness is completely dissolved by the total block of consciousness, and thus a new one is created, which will be completely different from the previous consciousness. Therefore, it is also certain that after the death of a human being, he will not reappear through a rebirth, but that life does not end and will also never end with death, because the content of the old consciousness is deleted by the total block of consciousness, and a new consciousness with new content is created. The life of human beings and all life forms in the universal expanse, as well as the universe itself, is such that life after death is never definitely over. Every life form has a spirit form, respectively, a spirit energy form, which is reborn as an inseparable part of the universe up to the highest absolute forms, namely up to the fusion with the being absolute. If human beings, all life forms of fauna and flora as well as the universe etc., had come into being by pure chance, as is claimed by narrow-minded and ignorant scientists, then this would really be extremely strange and would not make sense, nor would the universal, respectively eternal life of the reborn spirit form. Also the dissolving of the material consciousness, and the complete decay of the human body, and all life in general, after death, as well as the rebirth of a new body with a new consciousness, subconsciousness, and a new personality would not make sense. The spirit-energetic world, which in human beings, and all life forms of fauna, and flora, as spirit form respectively spirit-energy form, enlivens the material body, in humans with seat in the roof of the midbrain, paired node, colliculus superior, brings into play that very important aspect, through which the circle is closed and the whole gives a conclusive overall picture. The entire exchange of information between all different kinds of material forms of consciousness, forms of instinct consciousness and forms of impulse consciousness, as well as the spirit energy levels of universal consciousness respectively. The spirit energy world has the effect that in the entire universe, more and more complex living beings inevitably arise. This shows at another time that human beings, and all human-like beings, as well as all myriads of other life forms of all genera and species of fauna and flora, did not come into existence by chance, but that there is an order behind it, which corresponds to an impulse order. And this again proves that all earthly and universe-wide life of every form, genus, and species also continues in new forms after death and has absolute meaning. And for this purpose I can recite the following, which I have written here. Moment, yes, here it is. When a human being has died, respectively is effectively dead, he cannot be resuscitated. A resuscitation is only possible if the human being is not yet dead, that is to say, is not dead. Consequently, his spirit, that is to say, his spirit form, has not yet left the body. If, however, the human being has actually died and is therefore dead, then his spirit or spirit form has already left the body, and consequently no resuscitation can take place. The spirit, respectively the spirit form, only revives a living body, and that on the 21st day after procreation. But if the body is dead, then a spirit form does not return to it, because it never revives a dead body. A spirit form can never lose its energy and power, because it is integrated into the eternal energies and powers of creation, which as universal consciousness energetically encompasses everything and anything. This also means that the spirit form is immortal and is inseparably connected with the creation of universal consciousness. With regard to human beings, they are only enlivened by the spirit form, and when they die, the spirit form changes into its afterlife. It remains in this realm until it, since it alone is capable of reincarnation respectively rebirth, returns to a human being and revives it when a new human being with a new personality is born. It thus expressly states that a new human being incarnates with a new consciousness and with a new personality, because the old consciousness and the old personality of the deceased person are dissolved by the deceased into pure subtle energy in the otherworldly realm of the total consciousness block. From this neutral energy, a new consciousness and a new personality is formed through the total block of consciousness. These are then, together with the reincarnating spirit form, born into the new human body respectively into the fetus. The spirit form only ever enlivens the same line of spirit and human being respectively their consciousness and personality, which are inseparably connected with the spirit form through the total block of consciousness. So it is given that always the same spirit form connected with the total block of consciousness enlivens the associated line of consciousness and personality. From the whole, it also follows that when a human being dies, he or she respectively, his or her consciousness and personality are not reborn. Consequently, there is not a rebirth of human beings, but only a rebirth respectively reincarnation of the spirit form. This is because the consciousness and personality of the deceased human being is dissolved and transformed into pure, subtle, neutral energy through the total block of consciousness in its afterlife. From this neutral energy, a new consciousness with a new personality is formed, which is then born into the new human being during his incarnation, together with the reincarnating spirit form. The reincarnation of the spirit form and the incarnation of the new consciousness and the new personality takes place on the 21st day after procreation. It is impossible for human beings to locate and trace the human spirit, at least at the present time, because they have neither the necessary apparatus nor any other means to locate and measure the spirit energy. The human being cannot see the human spirit, respectively the spirit form, because the pure creative spirit energy cannot be perceived by the human eye and also cannot be felt. There are also not yet any apparatuses or analytical devices, etc., also not in the field of ultraviolet or infrared, through which it would be possible to make the spirit, respectively, the spirit form or the creative spirit energy visible or measurable at all. It is also not possible for any particular state of consciousness of human beings to see the spirit, respectively the spirit form, because the spiritual energy is as absolutely invisible as pure air. The spirit, respectively the spirit form of human beings, is of purely creative spiritual energetic nature, and has nothing to do with consciousness, nor with the brain waves that can be perceived and measured. Erroneously, since ancient times, consciousness has been called the spirit of human beings, although the nature of the spirit is completely different from that of consciousness. The spirit, respectively the spirit form of human beings, is purely creative, while consciousness is a factor of human beings and is responsible for creating thoughts out of it, whereby the whole reason also arises out of it, so also understanding and reason. The spirit, respectively the spirit form, is only the creative natural given energy, which animates the human body. When the spirit leaves the human body, then it escapes into its beyond plane, which exists in the same space as the present reality of the planet, whereby the so-called beyond plane, contrary to the real material reality space, is differently dimensioned, namely in a subtle spiritual energetic nature. In relation to the planet, therefore, the otherworldly plane is arranged around the planet, just as this plane continues to exist throughout the universe, but in relation to the material reality plane, it is in a subtle reality to which human beings, as a material life form, have no access whatsoever, and consequently they can neither see nor perceive anything. Therefore, on this level, it is impossible for human beings to see or otherwise perceive the spirit, respectively, the spirit form that has escaped from the material body. That the afterlife realm of the planet is arranged in a different dimensional form than the real material reality space, not only in this, but also in the entire universe, has its reason. Thus, it follows from the spiritual teachings that if a planet is destroyed or simply becomes incapable of life, then the spirit forms existing on it and the other dormant spirit energies are not destroyed, but that these migrate to wander through world space until a new planet is found on which human life exists. On this planet, the spirit forms then settle again, mix with those already existing there, and thus enter again or further into a cycle of reincarnation or rebirth.